I'm drawing infinite cards in Marvel. This video is purely for entertainment and does not infringe on copyrights or laws. The rights to the novel and image belong to the original author. We do not claim ownership. Don't like waiting and want to listen to this fanfic in full now? Subscribe to our Patreon, where you'll find the best fanfics. Chapter 426 SHIELD Meeting, First Battle in New York. At that time, Kyle and his party were still in the space universe that was not known how many light years away. At this time, Earth, New York, the SHIELD headquarters building. In the Aegis conference room on the top floor, the floor-to-ceiling windows let in the afternoon sun. In the bright and spacious conference hall, a few people of different ages and genders sat scattered on a large round table. Sitting at the head seat at the end of the round table was Nick Fury in a black windbreaker and wearing a one-eye patch. He rested his hands on his chin, and his dark face was stern and slightly ugly. The female agent, Hill, who was his right-hand man, was standing by his seat. Most of the other seats are left empty in 2s and 3s. Captain America Steve Rogers, who always wears a blue striped tight-fitting combat uniform, sits on the left side of the round table. The seat on the left is the Falcon Sam Wilson with a mechanical instrument on his back. Widow Natasha Romanoff. As for the right column of the conference round table, Kyle's superhuman doppelganger with partial human personality, the son of God Caesar Carl, who looks like a 4 or 5-year-old child. He was half lying down using the seat as a small bed, with his head protruding slightly from the table, sucking sugar energy with a lollipop in his mouth, and muttering immaturely, "Is there that soda, my lord? Please be serious. This is a major meeting concerning the peace of the earth." Eddie Brock, the bodyguard on the seat on the left, coughed. He was bearded and full of anger, and he was wearing an ill-fitting black suit uniform. The serious look of sitting upright is slightly comical. On the seat on Caesar's right is Dr. Banner with messy hair. He fucked up, glanced around at everyone in the field, and said weakly, "In this situation, I think it's better to continue to rest. Alright, lest the Hulk inside me come out and make trouble." The 3 Steves in the row on the left side of the round table looked like secret agents. Like Director Fury, they were all tensed at this time, with a tense expression as if they were facing an enemy. In the row on the right, the 3 Caesars are more like pretending to be characters in this meeting. Few people know that those on the right side of the round table are the real high-end combat power left behind on the Earth. "Bring a bottle of Coke," Furui whispered to the back. Hill slightly nodded helplessly, and then exited the meeting hall. "Furry. I still can't believe that Agent Patton suddenly defected." Natasha raised her beautiful eyes, and her brown eyes stared directly at Fury. "I can't believe it either, but this is the truth." Fury spread his hands and said in a deep voice, "Just half an hour ago, the man with a double-horned golden armor on his head called himself Loki, and said that he came from the realm of the gods. And then directly snatched the universe Rubik's Cube at the Aegis underground base has been keeping." The director was at the scene at the time. When our agents were about to fight back, Eagle Eye agents suddenly pulled out their arrows and shot at the Aegis security personnel, and assisted the Chennai man holding the staff to escape from the underground base with a cosmic Rubik's Cube, Zai said. Agent Will walked back to the hall, and then Fury finished speaking, and put a bottle of iced Coke on Caesar's table. "Thank you." Caesar held the iced Coke in his little hand as if he was not afraid of the cold, and unscrewed the lid. When he heard the name Loki, a flash of surprise flashed in his jewel-like blue eyes. It turned out that it was the younger brother of a certain god who came. Fury nodded, and said majestically, "That's right. Regardless of whether Agent Patton was forced by personal circumstances or controlled by others, we don't know, but he is still wanted throughout the city." "Okay," Natasha frowned, showing a little resentment and worry. She and Barton are close friends, so naturally they don't believe that the other party will rebel, let alone the object of allegiance is someone from the outside world. In other words, our New York City has a so-called god. Steve's tone was quite weird. He didn't expect that after 70 years of freezing, the outside world has changed, and even mythical gods and the like appeared. It's a god, but it just lives longer and has some gifted aliens. A few years ago, there was also a god who came to the earth, and then returned with a hammer. When Fury said this, he paused for a moment, seemed to remember something, and said inexplicably, "Many years ago. I knew that we humans are not alone. There are many alien races and civilizations in the universe. And Kyle returned to when we were on Earth. We also said that one day, we will face those aliens, and even start a battle with them to rob resources. Maybe, that day is now." Fury glanced at everyone on the round table, and said solemnly, This is the meaning of the creation of the Avengers. The real first battle of the Avengers assembly will inevitably make the heroes on the field excited, but tun tun tun. The strange and weird sound made everyone in the hall stiffen, and Kiki turned their eyes to Caesar. I saw him holding the bottle in both hands, looking up, pouring Coke into his mouth. Caesar's small belly was like a bottomless pit. No matter how much seawater he drank, his belly didn't show any signs of bulging. Young master, pay attention to the occasion. Eddie patted his forehead, speechless for a while. After Caesar finished drinking, he threw away the Coke bottle and touched his stomach. His body suddenly floated up from the chair, and he said immaturely, "That's all, right? Okay, I'll go to Loki now and beat him up. By the way, bring back the cosmic Rubik's Cube, Eddie, let's go." Caesar did not forget to tickle his fingers at Eddie. Eddie sighed softly, got up from his seat, and stretched out his left hand to Caesar. Caesar grabbed two of the fingers, pulled Eddie, who was 3 or 4 times bigger than himself, and flew out from the top lobby hundreds of meters high, directly through the French windows under the accelerated flight. The two quickly left the sight of everyone. The meeting hall of the original Aegis, due to the high-altitude strong wind pouring in, the remaining few people were silently messed up in the wind. It's really like Kyle's style. Steve smiled. "Captain, thank you for being able to laugh." Sam stared at him and said bitterly, "Let that violent god mess around, and things might get worse. Don't worry, the young master still has a sense of proportion, not to mention Eddie is beside him." Natasha comforted. What if Eddie and the symbiote in him followed suit? Sam asked a question that no one on the field could answer. Dr. Banner raised his hand and asked weakly, "Why don't I persuade you to fight, Fury? It's over, it's over. New York is going to suffer. This is a real monster fight." Sam's neck shrank slightly, and he felt a faint chill behind him. Steve stood up, propped his hands on the table, and said, "Okay, we can't sit on the sidelines. Let's go now, and the goal is to arrest Loki, the man from God's domain, and Hawkeye agents. There is also the cosmic Rubik's Cube, don't forget," Fury added, and then gave instructions to Hill behind him, "Just in case, you can activate that." Yes, Hill immediately understood what Fury was referring to, and nodded solemnly. Chapter 427 Evil God and Son of God. After dark. The lights were turned on in the bustling streets of New York City, and the light sources gathered together, illuminating the black night sky of the dome. Caesar, with a t-shirt with an Iron Man pattern on his top and casual cropped trousers on his bottom, stood on the top of the tallest tower of the Empire State Building in the cold night wind, holding a lollipop that seemed endless. He looked down at the panoramic view of New York City. Accompanied by Eddie stood aside, shivering in the night wind, wrapped up the suit jacket that had not been changed, and wondered, "Young master, how long are we going to stand here and wait?" "Wait until Loki shows up," Caesar said naturally. "Then why don't we take the initiative to find them like Captain America and the others?" Eddie complained. "How do you take the initiative to find it?" Caesar smiled. "A villain like Loki, who is extremely cunning, is proficient in all kinds of spells in God's domain, and now he holds the Rubik's Cube that can travel through space. If the Earth is turned upside down, there is no way to find him. I understand the truth." Eddie twitched a corner of his mouth, and said helplessly, "Then if he doesn't come out, or returns directly to God's domain, don't we have to wait here all night?" "Don't worry about that." Caesar showed a bright smile on his small face, and said firmly, "Loki is an evil god in Norse mythology. With his ambitious temperament, how could he just get the Rubik's Cube and leave the Earth decisively?" Seeing Caesar's exclusive devil-smiling face, Eddie felt even colder, and muttered in a low voice, "How does it feel? You know him better than Rocky himself." Caesar pretended not to hear it, and smiled without saying a word. After all, he was a man who had read the script. As far as Luoji's second son has a small temper, he can only be regarded as a small villain, and sooner or later he will be whitewashed into a cute old boy. Having said that, the Rainbow Bridge over Thor God's domain has also been repaired for too long. "Okay," Eddie suddenly frowned, but he heard the reminder of the toxins in his body. Looking down a street, he saw a row of police cars with flashing warning lights rushing towards a certain street at the end of his sight. "It seems that there is something wrong." Caesar bit the candy in his mouth, bounced the stick, and then gently closed his blue eyes. Eddie was used to this for a long time, and wisely stopped talking, so that Caesar could give full play to his superhuman hearing. In the strong wind at an altitude of hundreds of meters, there are many waves of sound like broken thoughts. "Master, how to get to Aho Road? Thank you for your patronage. This is your change, please keep it." Mom. I want to listen to fairy tales when I go to bed tonight, finally off work. Overtime is really annoying. Clatter, clatter, plop, all kinds of cumbersome and intensive conversation sounds from the entire New York City center, including car horns, electronic audio, underground water, etc. All the sounds are like a stream without omission, and they all flow into Caesar's mind. After several years of adaptation, Caesar can easily accommodate these collected voices, and through superhuman consciousness and reaction ability, he can filter out the information he wants to get. I am a god from the great realm of the gods. All of you weak natives on earth, you must submit to me. These extremely arrogant and arrogant words, with a bit of a second tone, can never be wrong. Caesar suddenly opened his eyes, looked 10 kilometers away to the left, and said calmly, I found it. Rocky is now at the New York Cathedral. Then what are you waiting for? Eddie suddenly took off his suit jacket, leaving only a long-sleeved white shirt, revealing a seemingly thin inner body, but actually a lean and strong body. A little black liquid gushed out from his body, wriggling consciously, and started acts as a defensive code all over the body. God, right? I really want to have a good time with him. The symbiont itself is tyrannical, wild, and evil. Eddie, who has been with toxins for several years, has been assimilated by more than a little bit. At this time, the New York Cathedral, under the magnificent retro chandelier. The tourists from all over the world and the locals in New York were all standing there in a daze at this moment, their eyes focused on the church gate with uncertain eyes. On the wide steps where the crowd was separated, a man wearing gold armor, a golden cloak, and a hand was walking down. A mysterious man with an amethyst staff. What the hell are you playing tricks? A big man surrounded by the door with a discontented face yelled at a mysterious man, but before he finished speaking, as the man raised his staff, a blue beam of light hit the big man immediately, blasting him on the spot crumble into nothingness. Killed. On Church Square in New York, hundreds of nearly 1,000 people witnessed this terrible scene. Many people were horrified, and they were about to cause turmoil and flee outside. Loki smiled evilly at the corner of his mouth, and used the hallucination spell. Immediately, 3 or 4 clones appeared at different street entrances, blocking the escape routes of the people. A large group of people was surrounded by Loki in the square. Toot. A police car with its siren blazing and flashing was driving towards the outside, but Loki just raised his hand slightly, and the staff sent out a beam of light like a cannonball again, overturning the driving police car 180 degrees to the ground. The people couldn't help but let out a burst of exclamation, and the sound was interrupted by a voice, "Kneel down, Your Majesty." 4 or 5 Loki repeated his words, raised his staff, exuded shimmering power, and his handsome face was full of evil spirits. Thousands of people were immediately suppressed, silent as if they did not dare to move, under the pressure of an unknown force. As the first person knelt down in fear, soon there would be a second and a third. In less than 5 seconds, thousands of people in the square were kneeling on the ground, and only Rocky stood with his head held high in the surrounding area. That's not right. Let the Avatar act as a guard, and Rocky held a staff in his hand, walked among the kneeling crowd, and said with a smile, "You humans are born like this. Freedom and happiness bind you, and you long to be enslaved. It is the truth of the universe. You are crazy about pursuing power and status, but in fact, there is a deep-rooted slavishness in your bones. Sooner or later, you will submit to your rulers." As soon as Loki finished speaking, his face suddenly froze, but on the church square, there was a stone statue of a young man holding a sword, facing him and looking down on him. I hate that man's sculpture. Sooner or later, my sculpture will fill every city in the world. Loki raised his staff with bulging veins on his forehead, accumulating energy with a blue light, without any scruples about the people under the stone statue. The sculpture of the symbol of peace is about to be smashed into slag. Call out. The blue light beam shot towards the peace sculpture. At this critical moment, a small figure suddenly jumped down from the sky. With a slap in the afterimage, it directly slapped the magic beam back, and the revolving beam knocked Loki down on the ground. The blonde boy stood firmly on the ground, supporting the soul of the main stone statue with one hand, and with one hand still in his trouser pocket, looking at Loki on the ground, and muttered immaturely, "Well, it's okay to talk if you have something to say. Don't do anything to this stone statue casually. The sculpture didn't bother you, it's the Son of God." Little Superman. The people in the field were also stunned, and then burst into bursts of surprise. Chapter 428 Little Brother Loki. That Superman is Superman. Can you remove the word small? Looking at the cheering crowd around him, Caesar was a little speechless. When he saw Loki getting up from the ground, he quickly added, also, if you can leave here, I will be even happier. The crowd smiled knowingly, then hurriedly stood up from the ground, fled in a bang, and soon vacated an open space in front of the New York Cathedral. A child, Loki stood up holding the staff, and looked at Caesar inexplicably. Before he could be surprised, when on Earth, even a child could receive a magic attack, a huge black shadow suddenly fell from the top of his head. God, right? Eat my kick. The feet covered with dark muscle layers stepped down quickly. Loki hastily held up the staff with both hands, and the moment his big feet landed on the staff, the blue light swayed like waves. The physical offensive that erupted under the super-powerful way is not inferior to all kinds of fancy and mysterious spells. Loki snorted in pain, but didn't let go of his strength. The floor under his feet cracked inch by inch. He looked up coldly, and saw a tall and burly dark humanoid monster stepping on the staff. Eddie's pair of emotionless white eyes reflected Loki, his bloody mouth full of fangs open wide, his long tongue was constantly wriggling with saliva, and he whispered hoarsely with a grin, I really don't know, God's head, what would it taste like, you lowly creatures? Loki gritted his teeth to support, and suddenly felt a gust of wind blowing in front of him, and Caesar had come right in front of him, his feet were suspended in the low air, and the small fist clenched in his right hand was straight at his defenseless belly fist. It seemed that it was just a random punch that was light and fluffy, but Luoji felt that there was a lot of power, and it exploded on the lower abdomen as if he had been hit by a high-speed train. He flew towards the church steps behind him, dragging the hunting golden cloak on his back, and plowed a slightly deeper ditch on the floor. Why are you talking so much to him? If you don't beat him up, you won't learn the lesson. Eddie, keep hitting me, we're mixed doubles. Caesar patted the dust on his little hand, and pointed at the toxin symbiosis form that fell to the ground. Eddie said. Okay. Eddie grinned ferociously, and while Loki's body was still stuck in the steps, he stomped on the floor and jumped over. A small-scale hurricane blew up on his body. He opened his big hand and grabbed Loki in his hand, pressing continuing to rub violently under the ground. There was absolutely no chance for the staff to display its power. Loki, don't you want to play seriously? Caesar bickered and felt bored, so he lightly jumped onto the stone sculpture of the peace symbol beside him, and sat on top of the 3-meter-high sculpture to watch the show quietly. Boom boom boom. At the steps of the church entrance, the ground collapsed during the fight, and the dust filled the square, and the battle situation was reduced to one-sided ravages and crushing. Eddie's hoarse growl, and Loki's screams began one after another, and Loki still wailed repeatedly, don't slap your face, called out. An Aegis fighter in stealth mode emerged from a low altitude of about 30 meters near the church square. The inner driver, Natasha, stared blankly at the battle situation below, obviously still confused about what happened. The hatch on the left side opened, and a tall and vigorous figure jumped down decisively from the fighter plane. When it landed on the ground, it immediately rolled tactically. With a 5-star round shield worn on the left hand, it landed safely with an almost perfect posture. Caesar turned around, looked at the shield-wielding man in a tight-fitting striped battlesuit, and said carelessly and naively, Captain, I'm sorry, I didn't give you a chance to make a speech. It doesn't matter. Captain America shrugged, glanced at the battle situation at the door of the church, and asked, has the target prisoner been controlled? For now, yes, but if you come one step later, maybe Eddie will bite off Loki's head on a whim and try something new. Caesar showed a devil-like smiling face. After finishing speaking, a figure suddenly flew out of the battle and rolled down to Steve's feet. Steve looked at the ground, and it was Loki who was thrown out. At this time, Loki's hair was messed up, and his golden armor could hardly be maintained. He was lying face up on the floor and twitched slightly. Rocky saw Steve, squeezed out a row of white teeth, and sighed, an American soldier? An outdated person? Hurry up, arrest me, I've had enough of that big black man. If you continue to resist, not only the big black man, but also a big green man? With a stern face, Steve directly picked up the shackles, and clasped Loki's hands behind his back according to the procedure. Is it over so soon? It's really meaningless. In the dust cloud, Eddie took the amethyst staff and stepped out step by step. The huge and burly monster figure gradually weakened and shrunk. When it came out, it had already returned to its human form. Eddie glanced at Caesar, and after Caesar nodded, he took the initiative to pass the staff to Steve by the way. Steve held Loki in one hand, took the staff in the other, and said to Caesar and Eddie, I'm going to take him to the temporary base, where he will be detained, and you all should follow. I'm okay. Caesar spread his hands and jumped off the sculpture. Did he know that this farce had just begun? Eddie was more straightforward, walked behind Caesar, and said casually, wherever the young master goes, I will go. Okay, let's go then. Steve said something to the walkie-talkie. The Aegis fighter plane slowly landed on the square. The deck of the rear hatch opened downward. He escorted Loki to the front. Caesar floated behind him. Eddie faithfully walked at the rear. No one noticed. Eddie looked at the backs of the crowd. A cold black light flashed faintly in his eyes. After half a minute, the Aegis fighter was launched, leaving a mess in New York's Church Square. The spread wings schemed the clouds. The fighter plane rose to an altitude of, meters, and the New York City below shrank into dots of light. Inside the cabin, Natasha controls the fighter plane in the main driver's seat. Loki, with his golden armor removed, looked innocent, sitting in a corner of the deck in a bit of embarrassment, surrounded by Steve, Caesar, and Eddie, looking him up and down. It's a god, but it's no different from a human being, Eddie muttered. Something's not quite right. Steve frowned slightly as he looked at Loki, who had been successfully captured. With her back turned to everyone, Natasha seconded, that's right, that man is very cunning. Also, Bucky didn't act with him. Steve looked at Caesar, not treating him as a child, but as a mature member of S.H.I.E.L.D. He said in surprise, he's very powerful. It shouldn't be so easy. I understand what you mean. Caesar nodded, and said bluntly, even if he can't beat Eddie, he can get away safely, and he won't fall into her hands so easily. Hearing everyone's doubts and suspicions, Loki blinked helplessly and said, hey, you guys overestimate me too. That kid named Caesar, you punched out all my bile. There was that big black guy just now, who was very violent, and you are considered a first-class beast in the universe. I think he should be gagged, Eddie suggested. Good idea. As if Steve really accepted the proposal, he wanted to find sealing tape. Suddenly, as the cabin trembled violently, thunder and lightning flashed outside the windshield of the fighter plane, and thunder and lightning crisscrossed across the dome of the fighter plane. Loki was originally looking relaxed and happy, but after Lei Ming appeared, his face immediately became stiff and tense, and his body couldn't help trembling slightly. Captain, someone is here. Caesar raised his head as if aware of it, and looked at the top of the fighter plane cabin. His blue eyes looked through the steel plate, and he saw a man wearing an armored cloak falling from the sky amidst the storm and lightning on the fighter plane shell, ignoring the strong wind and oxygen-free environment standing on the fighter plane above. The Rainbow Bridge has finally been repaired. Chapter 429. Someone, who is it? Steve looked surprised, seeing Loki's abnormality and Caesar's dazed expression. Open it and see if you don't know. Eddie took a step forward, tapped the red button on the engine room, and the large deck of the aft compartment immediately opened downward. Accompanied by the high-altitude strong wind pouring in, it can be seen that there is a hammer in front. The big man in the cloak holds the handle of the hammer, half a beat faster than the strong wind, passing Eddie and Steve at a very high speed. Grab Loki in the corner of the cabin. Snapped. At this moment, a small figure inserted between the two, and the seemingly fragile and boneless little hand stretched out in lightning, and it actually held the two fingers of the cheeky man firmly, causing his fingertips to touch. Loki has come to a complete stop. The complexion of the cheeky man changed slightly. Looking sideways, he saw a blond boy who was less than 5 years old. His feet were suspended in midair, and his left hand clasped his two fingers like iron tweezers, showing his innocence with an evil smile. Here we come, brother Thunder God. Child, I don't know you. Thor's beard was frantic, and while growling, the Thor's hammer in his hand burst out a series of thunder and lightning, and the thunderbolt crackled, blasting Caesar's small body against the inner wall of the cabin. Immediately afterwards, Thor grabbed Loki's neckline and waved Thor's hammer. The two quickly poured into the strong wind against each other, and rushed out of the fighter plane through the open rear hatch. The vast night sky. All of this happened in a flash, and with Steve's superhuman reaction, he didn't even have time to stop it. Another god. Eddie knew that he was in trouble. He twitched the corners of his mouth stiffly, and said to himself in his heart, Toxin, it's fine if I didn't react. Why didn't you react? Just like usual the Toxin seemed to go to sleep early and ignored Eddie as the host. Maybe there is a god on this universe, but it will never look like that. Steve's face was stern, and he looked at the cabin behind him. Caesar was levitating from the ground, and the electric current that was still flickering on his body was completely absorbed in reverse. Caesar grinned and said, So, This guy is really relentless. Steve was taken aback by Caesar's tone and words. Caesar, do you know him? He is the hammer god who came to Earth a few years ago. He is Kyle, well, my father's old friend. This is not the point. The point is that he will run away with the target prisoner. Caesar finished speaking as quickly as he was prevaricating, accelerated his flight forward, and also submerged into the high altitude outside the fighter plane against a strong wind, chasing Thor, the god of thunder who took Loki away. Captain, what should we do now? Natasha was driving the fighter plane, unable to get away, so she could only ask Steve, the team leader. What else can I do? I can only go up. Steve sighed, carrying the buckler with both hands, not wearing a parachute, accelerated the run-up sprint, and finally jumped out of the cabin. The 5-star round shield is pressed at the bottom of the body, so as to slow down the huge impact of the high-altitude fall. A wild forest outside New York City. The two combined figures fell together at a high speed. Thor's feet landed with a bang, his right hand tightly held Thor's hammer, and his left hand swung forward suddenly, throwing Loki several meters away. There was a close contact between the back and the boulder. Loki half lied on the boulder, looked at the angry soul, and did not get up from the ground, and said with a sinking face, "You are still the same, Soul, you damn bastard." Soul took a few steps forward, suppressed his anger, and said in a deep voice, "Do you know that when the Rainbow Bridge was destroyed, you fell into the abyss of the universe, and my father and I thought you were dead? God's domain even held your funeral. It's your father, not mine. Also, God's domain is yours, not mine." Loki sneered. Soul was heartbroken and said, "He raised the two of us together, and God's domain is also your home." Loki was non-committal, turned his face away, and said lightly, "There's nothing to say between you and me, you." Soul was about to continue persuading, but suddenly frowned, turned around and saw Caesar with his arms folded, slowly suspended in the low sky. Caesar looked at Hammer God, whom he hadn't seen for a few years, and he spread his hands and said, "Well, I don't want to disturb the reunion of your brothers. However, Soul, your brother Loki is now a major criminal and must be brought back to the SHIELD temporary base for processing. Loki is a person from God's domain, and must be dealt with by our God's domain." When Soul was speaking, Loki murmured behind him, "I have already betrayed God's domain. Shut up, I'll teach you a lesson later." Soul seemed to remember his elder brother's position. He glanced at Loki domineeringly, looked at Caesar squarely again, and said with a little surprise, "Child, who are you? Why do you feel that there is a shadow of a person on your body? Oh, are you talking about Kyle? I was created by him, and he is the creator." Caesar responded with a smile. Every time he called his own body his father, it was a bit weird, and it would be perfect to use the creator instead. After all, the avatar is also created by the main body. "So, Kyle is your father. I haven't seen you for a few years, but he actually has a child?" Thor was startled, and exclaimed out loud. This made Caesar feel frustrated and helpless. No matter how much he went around, he would eventually understand it as a father-son relationship. No wonder, so they are the descendants of the guardians of God's realm? Loki watched Caesar secretly, touched the lower abdomen where the fist mark was left, and felt that there was still a dull pain there. The previous punch was not a joke. If you want to occupy the earth, the guardian lineage is a role that cannot be left alone. Loki thought to himself, and began to plan his own schemes. After all, he was deliberately arrested, but it was the second step in the plan to occupy the earth. "Kyle and I are good friends. Why? What about others now? After beating Loki tonight, we can have a few drinks along the way." Saul laughed loudly, and looked around earnestly. He who was angry and arrogant before, seemed to be a completely different person at this moment. He's not here, more precisely, he's not on Earth. He's gone to outer space. Caesar didn't care about Loki, who was eavesdropping. After all, Kyle's body and Iron Man Tony left the Earth. During the 3-year transition without any news, it was already well known in New York City. "Yes, that's really a pity." Soul scratched his head, and suddenly threw Thor's hammer in his hand. The silver-gray hammer resembled a bolt of lightning, and it approached Caesar in an instant after passing 10 meters. Caesar remained motionless. The hammer stopped abruptly half a centimeter away from his chest. "Why not dodge?" Thor recalled Thor's hammer, looking at Caesar in surprise. "You don't have a murderous look on you. Obviously you don't intend to do anything to me." Caesar smiled and was not surprised by Soul's temptation. "Then this time, I'm going to get serious." Thor swung Thor's hammer with his left hand, causing it to rotate as fast as a speeding car, driving the surrounding dust and fallen leaves to fly. Bring it on. Caesar's face was full of seriousness, and he was just about to try how far behind his Superman avatar is now with Thor's first-class combat power. Coming, Thor yelled, and threw the Thor's hammer in his hand. Caesar was suspended in the air, his palms stretched forward, and he wanted to take the blow of Thor's hammer with his body alone. Loki, who was on the sidelines, opened his eyes wide. He also wanted to take this opportunity to learn about Caesar's combat power. Just before Thor's hammer touched Caesar's palm, a tall figure inserted into the middle from the side. A round shield with a star on it replaced Caesar's little hand, and turned the powerful Thor's hammer back to the shield. Captain America Steve, who was in the midst of the battle, retracted his buckler gently, glanced at the three Caesars, and calmly said, "The game is over, follow me back to the shield temporary base. The content of this chapter has been corrected and modified, and it can be eaten normally after refreshing." Chapter 430 Shield Temporary Base. The high seas area outside North America, the hinterland of the Pacific Ocean. The Aegis fighter flew out from the inland all the way, and after reaching the ocean area, it gradually lowered its navigation altitude and speed, as if it had always had the destination it should go to, and it did not deviate from the navigation direction at all. Current altitude, 5,000 meters, 3,000 meters, 1,000 meters, 500 meters. Low altitude navigation warning. The reminder lights flickered, and the reminders in the cabin kept ringing. Natasha piloted the fighter familiarly and landed on the sea level against the shining golden sun. "That, Miss Natasha, right? The shield temporary base you mentioned is in the sea below." Eddie leaned against the driver's seat and asked questioning questions. He looked down through the windshield and saw that the sea below the front was full of blue waves. On the vast and boundless sea, there was nothing but sea water and schools of fish jumping out from time to time. "There is a hint of an island or a ship." A smile appeared at the corner of Natasha's mouth, but she didn't give any relevant answers. She just concentrated on controlling the fighter plane, and her driving speed and altitude kept dropping, and soon she was less than, meters away from the sea level. Caesar coughed and said old-fashionedly, "Eddie, don't embarrass me, just watch carefully, okay?" Eddie was making fun of himself, watching with wide eyes, wanting to see how to create a temporary shield base in the air. Captain America Steve and Thor, the two of them are still in the rear cabin, staring at the handcuffed Loki. In front of him, have been discussing how to deal with what Loki committed on the Earth series of crimes. "It's here, sit still, don't scare me out of the urine." In response to Eddie's joke, Natasha flexibly bounced on the virtual panel with both hands and 5 fingers, and then pulled back the pusher on the pilot next landing. "This is..." Eddie widened his eyes in astonishment, and saw the originally calm sea below. Within a radius of 1,000 meters, violent white waves suddenly rose, and several sea vortices of different sizes directly formed in an instant. Immediately afterwards, the water surface rose layer by layer, and from the bottom of the sea, a steel fortress like an island emerged rumblingly. A flat and white airstrip, countless black hole holes, and 4 huge Ferris wheel-like engine drives underneath, all of which are the top technological creations of the Earth at present. Accompanied by the fierce splashing of the waves, the sea water flowed outwards, quickly revealing the whole picture of the steel fortress, which was a super-large aircraft carrier warship. This extremely spectacular scene not only shocked Eddie, but also the three of Steve cast surprised eyes. Caesar was, on the contrary, the most unsurprising one among the crowd. There were originally 3 helicopter carriers, one of which was destroyed when the Hydra spies were wiped out, and the remaining 2 were all owned by the main body Kyle. However, 3 years ago, Fury had the cheek to come to Kyle again and took back one of the aircraft carriers as a secret weapon used by S.H.I.E.L.D. in an emergency. The Aegis fighter plane descended and cooperated with the aircraft carrier to float up from the deep sea, and just touched the ground and landed on the deck where there was still some sea water. Some hatches of the aircraft carrier opened, and many engineering vehicles and special agents appeared on the deck one after another, immediately entering the battle-ready work after the aircraft carrier surfaced. Headed by Director Fury, a group of special agents followed behind, and came to respond under the Aegis fighter resolutely. The fighter hatch opened. Caesar and Eddie walked in front, and the two were still idly looking at everything around them. Steve and Saul followed closely behind, one on the left and one on the right, escorting Loki off the plane. "Oh, to be honest, I'm very happy to meet the gods in Nordic mythology." Fury looked at Saul, then at Loki, and said lightly, But I still have to say, the Earth does not welcome you, unless you're here in peace." Loki smiled, and said stiffly, "Sorry, I am your future ruler." "Shut up," Soul scolded Loki coldly, and together with Steve, the two almost supported Loki with their hands and walked down. "Where's the cosmic Rubik's Cube?" Fury asked Natasha, who finally got off the fighter plane, holding an amethyst staff. "Loki didn't bring the Rubik's Cube with him, and Barton didn't follow him," Natasha replied. Fury said with a sinking face, "Of course Barton didn't follow him. Just an hour ago, Bucky robbed a group of underground scientists belonging to S.H.I.E.L.D. alien meteorite metal." Natasha looked at Loki's back, and said solemnly, "Loki is controlling Barton. Could it be that he wants to use the cosmic Rubik's Cube to make a fuss in the dark?" All in all, while guarding Loki, we must find the whereabouts of the Rubik's Cube as soon as possible. After Fury finished speaking, he looked at Caesar on the side, and said with a stern face, "Caesar, I still want to trouble you to stay here for a while, so as to avoid things we can't deal with." "Okay, let's find a place to eat, I'm hungry." Caesar agreed at will. If he leaves now, he won't be able to see the good show performed by Loki later. That said, I'm hungry too, Eddie grinned while clutching his stomach. Fury and Natasha were speechless for a while. Now it is an alien invasion event that concerns the safety of the Earth. It is estimated that Caesar and Eddie are the only masters and servants who can think so heartlessly to fill their stomachs. But there is no way. Who made Caesar and Eddie the two most stable high-end combat powers in the Avengers today? Thor is still unreliable for the time being. After all, he has not yet fully joined the alliance, and the enemy is his younger brother Loki. No one knows whether he will soften his heart and show mercy. Helicopter aircraft carrier, in the main pilot hall. After imprisoning Loki in the small black room, Fury took the members of the Avengers to the main driving hall, where he could overlook the spectacular scene on the deck of the entire aircraft carrier through the windshield. All the equipment in the hall are the most advanced and top-notch, and the computer screens are replaced by holographic projection virtual screens. Even the well-informed Dr. Banner was amazed when he entered the advanced interior cabin of the helicopter carrier. What's more, Steve, a veteran who has been frozen for 70 years, couldn't take his eyes off him. Only Caesar and Eddie were sitting in a corner, burying their heads in eating hot food, out of tune with the agents and workers who were busy at work. "Are you ready?" Fury stood on a platform, scanned the staff in the hall, and said solemnly, "Everyone on the deck has been evacuated. The 4 major engine drives have been inspected, the system data is all normal, over." The elite staff in the hall are manipulating the projection screens respectively, responding one after another like reporting points. "Very good, it's officially taking off." Fury waved his hand. Boom, the aircraft carrier trembled violently, and Caesar was already prepared, holding the plate of food with both hands and floating in the air. Eddie, who was buried in the spaghetti, jumped forward unexpectedly, dipping half of his face in the Italian sauce. "What are you doing, diving again? Or going to heaven?" Eddie picked up a tissue and wiped his face. When he glanced out and saw the aircraft carrier quickly leaving the sea and climbing into the sky, his mouth opened wide in horror. "I wiped it, it really went to the sky?" The repeated content of the previous chapter, except for the chapter name, has been revised and replaced with new content. Book friends who have purchased the previous chapter can read it directly without spending money repeatedly. Chapter 431, A Perfect Creation combining strength and knowledge. After the altitude rose above, meters, the dark clouds below covered the bottom, and the helicopter carrier was bathed in bright sunlight forever. On the side of the main cockpit hall, there is a well-equipped scientific research room. The amethyst staff is placed on one of the workbenches. Dr. Banner is executing Fury's instructions to track and search the light particles of the Rubik's Cube. Except for the staff assisting by the side, the current members of the Avengers have all moved into this room. Through the surveillance video here, you can know everything that happened in the aircraft carrier's driving hall and the prison room. At this time, Loki was imprisoned in the prison room, which was located in a huge glass circular tank in the center of the room. Fury stood outside the closed glass door, looking at Loki with him through the 10-centimeter thick bulletproof glass. With a stern face, Fury said to Loki in a deep voice, "I advise you not to try to break through this glass cage, otherwise, you will fall drunk from a height of, meters with this cage. This cage wasn't specially made for me, was it?" Loki said with a charming smile, holding the glass inner wall with both hands. "Of course, there are some monsters on Earth, much more vicious than you," Fury said calmly with a blank face. Loki looked around, suddenly surprised, and said sarcastically, I know. An angry green monster? You try to save the world by using a monster born for destruction? Doesn't it seem too naive and funny? You who want to occupy the earth are the most innocent and funny. Fury was unmoved, and after finishing his speech, he turned and left the prison room, leaving Loki alone in the cage. Loki raised his head, looked at the camera in the corner, and showed a treacherous and inexplicable smile. In the research room, turning off the surveillance screen that fixed Loki's face, Natasha looked at the rest of the Avengers, frowned, and said, he's too cunning. He was caught in the church alone. There must be some kind of conspiracy hidden in private. Well, he seems to have mentioned the green monster just now. Do we really have those things on our aircraft carrier? Eddie raised his hand and asked in surprise. Everyone in the scientific research room looked at him with strange expressions, and Caesar felt a little embarrassed and secretly raised his forehead. But it is. Eddie's identity is just Caesar's bodyguard, not even a member of the Avengers. Before he fused with the toxin, he had never heard of the existence of the Avengers, the Hulk, etc., and has been performing tasks according to the instructions of the Carl family. Steve and Natasha looked at each other. He touched his chin, and looked at Dr. Banner. Oh, how should I explain it? After all, I only heard about it, and haven't fully seen the true face in the darkness. I do not mind. Dr. Banner seemed very casual, while manipulating the equipment, explained, I was exposed to gamma radiation in the studio a few years ago, and the genes in my body were mutated. Once the emotion, if it gets out of control, it will turn into a green monster. I was the one who did the previous earthquake fall in the Harmon Crew neighborhood in New York. Amazing. Eddie opened his mouth wide in surprise. As a talented journalism graduate, he is still very familiar with the reports a few years ago, but he didn't know that there were many horrific inside stories hidden in them. Eddie suddenly spread his hands and complained, Dr. Banner, the two of us are in the same situation. You have an angry beast inside you, and I have a difficult master inside me. Dr. Banner smiled gently, just like an ordinary scientist, not to mention the staff of S.H.I.E.L.D. Even Steve and Natasha, members of the Avengers, were separated by a certain safe distance, so as not to accidentally irritate the green beast in its body. At this moment, a figure suddenly climbed onto Dr. Banner's shoulder, and even wrapped his arms around his neck, causing Steve and the others next to him to change color. Young master, what are you doing? Eddie was startled, stood up hastily, and stared at Caesar hanging on Dr. Banner's body with wide eyes. Caesar, come down quickly. Steve subconsciously picked up his buckler, and Natasha also reached for the pistol at her waist, feeling extremely tense physically and mentally, for fear that Dr. Banner would be stimulated and turn into the Hulk to dismantle the helicopter carrier. As if Caesar didn't hear it, he hung his hands on Dr. Banner's body, swinging back and forth from left to right. Okay, don't get too excited. Dr. Banner raised his hands to dissuade everyone who looked nervous, and glanced at Caesar behind him. Don't worry, as long as Caesar is present, Hulk will never come out no matter what. Why, does Hulk like children? Steve put down the buckler and asked in surprise. Dr. Banner said inexplicably, I don't know too well, but this is the intuition in my heart. Hulk may recognize the breath of the man on Caesar, so he doesn't want to come out. Mentioning that person, everyone was stunned. Kyle, the symbol of peace, although he is not on the earth, affects the world every moment. Has Hulk been beaten up by Kyle and grilled fiercely, and that feeling may be unforgettable for a lifetime? Caesar smiled, and said childishly, Dr. Banner, have you ever thought that the gamma rays that were so strong back then should have killed you in the studio, but you survived safely in the end? Listening to the words behind his ears, Dr. Banner was stunned, and thought to himself, little Caesar. You mean, the other me, Hulk, saved my life? Have you ever thought that maybe the Hulk isn't a side effect? After Caesar dropped this sentence, he jumped off Dr. Banner's shoulder, and sat on the workbench, leaning on the purple-blue crystal staff. What is the meaning of Hulk's existence? Dr. Banner shook his head lightly, expelled the chaotic thinking in his mind, and devoted himself to the work of finding the Rubik's Cube. By the way, Thor, right? Natasha cast her eyes on the big hammer-wielding man who was also silent in the room, and said, I heard that Loki is your younger brother. What do you think? I only know that he is burning with hatred now. Thor clenched the hammer tightly, raised his eyes and said, also, now Loki has an alien army in his hands. If he wants to occupy the earth, he will definitely request the alien army help. Dr. Banner suddenly remembered something when he heard the news, and he frowned and said, we seem to have missed some important clues. Just now Director Fury mentioned that the rebellious Bart stole this kind of metal. Everyone present, who is there, do you know what is the use of? Steve, Natasha, Sol, and Eddie looked at each other in blank dismay. After Iron Man Tony left the Earth, except for Dr. Banner, the rest seemed to be scumbags in the field of science. It's so simple, don't you all know? An extraterrestrial meteorite material can produce antiparticles and act as a space stabilizer. In this way, the new portal will not collapse at will, and can be more durable and expanded. A childish voice broke the dead silence in the room. Everyone looked at the workbench, only to see Caesar folded his arms and said, with a cosmic Rubik's Cube and, as long as there is a high-density power source, we can create a large enough interstellar portal. Fury's female assistant, Hill, had just entered the room, and when she heard Caesar's explanation, she couldn't help being surprised and said, "When did you learn thermonuclear astrophysics?" Before Caesar could answer, Eddie shrugged his shoulders and explained helplessly, "Young master, he had completed all the postgraduate majors on the planet a year ago, and he rejected one of the prestigious schools such as Harvard and MIT. By the way, series of lectures and seminars, this, probably, is a perfect creation that combines strength and knowledge. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelis. There you'll find the original version of this story, and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels." Chapter 432 Mind Gem. Looking at the surprised eyes of everyone, Caesar seemed very calm, and even took it for granted for a time. After all, the main body Kyle has already mastered these knowledge and skills by drawing cards quickly, and his Avatar naturally cannot hold back. In the past 3 years, Caesar not only worked hard to control superhuman power and awaken various superpowers, but also used his superhuman brain intelligence to spend a lot of time to perfect the only knowledge and skills on the Earth acquired. For the Kryptonians, it is far from enough to describe it with a photographic memory. Their brains are comparable to the system processors of supercomputers, and the speed of absorbing knowledge and skills is no less than the speed of absorbing natural energy. On the other hand, learning and further study can also make it easier for Caesar to calm down and gradually find the trick to control the huge energy and power in his body. Create a large enough interstellar portal. Dr. Banner's comprehension ability is extremely fast. Hearing this, he almost blurted out, "So, Loki wants to activate the cosmic Rubik's Cube and transfer his alien army far away from the sky to Earth?" Sol nodded immediately, and said in a deep voice, "It's very possible. This is very similar to Loki's style." "What did you just say?" Steve and Natasha were still in a daze, completely ignorant of scientific theories, and only heard Loki's secret intention to build a portal. Team leader, Dr. Banner looked at Steve, and said solemnly, "Agent Barton controlled by Loki is short of a high-density power source, which is enough to activate the cosmic Rubik's Cube in their hands and tear a hole in the space. This pair for the Earth, it will be a doomsday catastrophe. Is there not much time left for us?" Steve frowned, spread his hands, and sighed. "Okay, now I have another question. Where can Loki find the so-called high-density power source?" All the heroes who considered themselves scumbags shut their mouths one after another, and turned their attention to Dr. Banner and the 4-year-old Caesar. "High-density power source," Dr. Banner muttered softly, suddenly remembered something, and looked eagerly at Caesar on the workbench. "Stark, Industrial, you're right, Dr. Banner." Caesar smiled and said softly, "Stark Industries' new headquarters building is powered by a new type of arc reactor. If it uses the maximum frequency to supply energy, the normal electricity consumption of a New York City can still be supported." Now there is no need for the two of them to explain. The others understand completely. "I'm going to inform Director Fury right now, and Loki will send Barton to attack the Stark headquarters building." Knowing the urgency of the situation, Natasha got up from her seat and was about to walk out the door when the iron door happened to open from the outside. "No need, I've heard it." Director Fury walked into the scientific research room, glanced at everyone, turned on the communicator he carried with him, and ordered the staff in the main driving hall, "Now adjust the sailing direction of the helicopter carrier and set off for Stark Industries in the center of New York City." Natasha relaxed a little, and said happily, "Very well, we have found out what Barton's next purpose is. As long as Loki's purpose of being willing to be arrested is solved," Director Fury said in a deep voice, "that man is not easy to deal with. His thoughts are unfathomable. And it is difficult to use words to get his words out. Information is my specialty." I'll meet Loki alone. Natasha smiled charmingly, shook off her short bright red hair, and left the scientific research room with graceful cat steps. She's really a rose with thorns. I hope Loki doesn't prick her hands with blood. Eddie shrank his neck and commented in a low voice. For no reason, Eddie felt a little surprised in his heart, as if the toxins had been dormant in his body since the arrest of Loki, and he didn't gossip or make noises about eating raw seafood. He scratched his head a little irritably, and couldn't help shouting, "Well, is there any live seafood? Hurry up and bring me some, otherwise I'm not sure if the master in my body will go crazy like a green monster." This sentence is like a ignited fuse. Dr. Banner lowered his head, trembling slightly, moved his eyes away from the screen, his gaze was no longer as gentle as before, and asked Eddie coldly, "Are you annoying, mentioning the Hulk inside me all day? Are you looking at me, dislike, despise?" Steve got up, got involved in this topic inexplicably, and said coldly, "Eddie, haven't you been eating since just now? Can you give me some peace? What are you talking about?" Eddie walked up to Steve with an angry face, and shouted, "Arrest Loki. It's thanks to me and the young master. You old antique is always late. You said from time to time that you were going to bite people's heads. It's not a heroic act," Steve quickly retorted. Eddie chuckled, and taunted, "What? Do you want to take your shield? Let's go out and fight each other." Seeing the two arguing, the rest of the room not only did not dissuade them, but instead joined in the gunpowder-flavored topic. Thor picked up Thor's hammer, patted his strong chest and said, "Do you really want to fight?" Thor didn't even speak, "But you mere mortals speak loudly." "Do you want to make gestures?" Fury said abruptly. "It doesn't matter if you are Thor or not, as long as you are in the temporary base of S.H.I.E.L.D., you should pay attention to your various behaviors. The account of your brother killing more than 70 people on Earth has not been fully settled yet, whirling cloth. Okay, let's forget it now." Soul raised Thor's hammer without any hesitation, and there was a tendency to fight if there was a disagreement. Seeing this, Hill quietly touched the gun at his waist. "Have you said enough?" Dr. Banner took off his glasses, his mood was slightly unstable, and he began to pant slightly. In just 10 seconds, the air in the scientific research room was filled with the smell of gunpowder, and everyone in the room began to argue with each other unpleasantly. The only one who didn't join the riot was the blonde boy who was sitting on the workbench and watching them silently. "Have you finally started to do it, Loki?" Caesar seemed to have seen through everything, ignoring the noisy heroes and S.H.I.E.L.D. personnel, and looked sideways at the crystal magic staff on the table. Caesar could clearly perceive that the magic wand was activated secretly, but instead of releasing real energy, it emitted a subtle idea that interfered with one's mind. This kind of mental thought is very difficult to detect, and it forcibly draws out the negative emotions of people's hearts. This is the culprit that caused the people in the room to quarrel inexplicably. There is only such an item that can directly do this regardless of the strength of the creature. One of the Infinity Stones, the Mind Stone. "Oh," Caesar suddenly raised his head and looked at the ceiling of the scientific research room. His blue eyes penetrated through layers of steel decks, and he saw a fighter plane approaching unbiasedly 1,000 meters away from the helicopter carrier. The leader in the fighter plane cabin is the eagle-eyed agent whose mind has been manipulated. As for this, everyone in the scientific research room is still arguing endlessly, not noticing the enemy plane and the danger approaching at all. "Sure enough, without me, you still can't do well." Caesar shook his head helplessly, and stopped watching. His white and tender hands stretched out towards the spiritual staff. Instead of holding the staff, he pinched the magic staff, which was shining with purple-blue luster. The 5 fingers were slightly stronger, and there was only a click, and Caesar's face was as calm as before, but his right hand directly crushed the crystal on the staff. Chapter 433 The Collapsed Helicopter Carrier. The magic wand placed horizontally on the workbench. After the crystal on the head of the wand was crushed by Caesar, the body of the wand, which was originally shining with extraordinary luster, suddenly became a waste product and dimmed. The idea that attracted people's hearts also quickly dissipated from the huge research room with the destruction of the staff. "Caesar, what did you do?" Chief Fury's only one-eyed eye stared blankly at Caesar on the stage. At this time, Caesar blew air into his left palm, blowing off the broken crystal fragments, revealing the hidden treasure inside. Core, a brilliant and delicate yellow gemstone. The other people in the room stopped their quarrel and woke up from their lost mind. Thor, who raised Thor's hammer, Hill, who drew out the pistol at his waist, and Steve, who carried the 5-star round shield, put down the weapons in time with a dazed face. It's dangerous, almost. Dr. Banner leaned on the computer desk and patted his undulating left chest. His heartbeat was approaching out of control, and it stopped unexpectedly at the final critical point. Eddie sat softly on the chair, secretly lucky in his heart, thinking that fortunately the toxin didn't make trouble with him, otherwise there would have been a big fight. Your minds are bewitched. Caesar smiled faintly, opened his mouth suddenly, and threw the yellow gem in his hand into his mouth like candy. Everyone showed sluggish expressions, and Fury stepped forward with his face changed drastically, grabbed Caesar's calf with both hands, turned his whole small body over, and kept shaking and shaking. Caesar. That's not something you can eat. Give it to me quickly. Spit it out. Caesar tightly covered his mouth with his hands, and swallowed without hesitation with a grunt. This, Commissioner Fury's dark face turned pale at this moment, and he carefully put Caesar down. He, who is usually as stable as a mountain, asked anxiously at this time, "Are you okay? Do you feel unwell?" Caesar comforted him in turn, patted him on the shoulder, and said with a light smile, "Well, Fury, that thing is safest in my place. You might as well worry about the safety of the helicopter carrier instead of worrying about me." The safety of the helicopter carrier? Director Fury was taken aback. Particle matching is successful. The matching rate is as high as 90.00%. Hearing the voice prompt, Dr. Banner put back his glasses, looked at the virtual screen, and said in amazement, "We found the Rubik's Cube, and its location is only less than, meters away from the helicopter carrier." Tap tap tap. At the same time, there was a sound of footsteps in the corridor outside, and Natasha could be heard shouting eagerly, "I have found Loki's purpose. He wants to use Banner to completely destroy this helicopter carrier." Before he finished speaking, the helicopter carrier trembled violently, and then began to tilt to one side. The workbenches, computers, and documents and sundries in the scientific research room were all scattered on the ground. Everyone in the room was caught off guard and fell down one after another on the floor. Caesar, who had been forewarned for a long time, levitated in advance, floating in midair like a balloon, and blasted away a workbench that was thrown at him. Director Fury got up from the shaking ground and asked the communicator, "What happened?" The personnel in the cockpit hall on the other side immediately fed back the news of the attack. "Director, we were attacked by a fighter plane. The turbine of the third engine was damaged, and it needs to be repaired urgently. Otherwise the helicopter carrier will continue to fly from, meters away, forced landing at high altitude. Listen, let all the agents prepare for the battle immediately, and protect the safety of the main driving hall, and at the same time modify the navigation direction of the helicopter carrier, and go back to the sea." Considering the worst consequences of falling to death, Fury immediately made a decision, looked at the heroes that got up one after another, and said in a serious voice, "I need someone to repair the third engine turbine. I'll go, and I'll be the only one going." Caesar spread out his hands, and without waiting for the others to respond, he flew along the passageway where billowing smoke billowed. Without Iron Man Tony, he is the only one who knows mechanical engineering maintenance and can fly. Caesar flew to the corner of the passage, turned around suddenly, glanced at Banner and Eddie, and said meaningfully, "You guys give me some peace. I try to control it." Banner crawled on the ground, gritted his teeth in response, rushed back to Natasha in the scientific research room, and quickly rushed over to help him up. "I'll help Caesar." After Steve finished speaking, he carried the buckler and chased after Caesar's submerged passage. "I'm going to check the situation in the prison room. Loki must not be allowed to escape." Thor picked up Thor's hammer and rushed towards the prison room. Fury and other S.H.I.E.L.D. personnel rushed to the main driving hall. No one noticed that Eddie, who was sitting on the chair in the corner, was motionless like a sculpture. His eyes were ashen, without any expression or emotion. "As you ordered, I'm going to do it, Loki." A little bit of dark and viscous liquid secreted from Eddie's feet, flowing on the floor, and the target was Dr. Banner, who was supported by Natasha. In the previous battle at the entrance of the church, that is, the battle between Loki and Eddie, it seemed that Loki was ravaged and suppressed throughout, but not many people knew that Eddie was carelessly touched by the magic wand on his chest. As the host, Eddie's mind was not manipulated, but the toxins in his body were not so lucky. Loki planted the secret game of poison, and what he was waiting for was the moment when he would explode into trouble. Gululu crawled halfway, and the toxin suddenly bounced off the ground. Under Natasha's bewildered eyes, the toxin jumped onto Dr. Banner's body. Before the others could react, it disappeared under the clothes invisible. Eddie, who regained consciousness, saw the toxin penetrate into Banner's body, and his mouth couldn't help opening in horror. My God, in the prison cell. This is the General, S.H.I.E.L.D. and the Avengers. Loki slowly opened his eyes, opened his hands happily, and the automatic door with a glass circular groove opened inexplicably. Wait, where's my staff? Loki frowned suddenly, unable to perceive the location of the spiritual staff. At this moment, at a height above, meters outside of New York, only the propulsion of the 3 engine turbines remained in the air, and the helicopter carrier could hardly maintain its balance and fell slowly. More than half of the 3rd engine turbine has been blown up. As if a hole had been torn open on the aircraft carrier, exposing the inner passage of the aircraft carrier, with billowing black smoke billowing from the flames above. This is really horrible. Hawkeye is really relentless. Caesar came to the end of the tunnel, suspended in the air, scanning the badly damaged 3rd engine. Caesar, we have to put out the fire first. Steve hurried to catch up from behind, got a fire extinguisher from an unknown corner, and looked at the engine area with a strong fire in a little embarrassment. Fires do have to be put out, but your fire extinguisher won't do it alone. Caesar smiled, made a roll with his hands, took a deep breath, his cheeks and belly swelled up, and then suddenly blew into the whole of the roll. Wow, the swift gust of wind whizzed, quickly forming a small storm, sweeping across the engine area where the fire was serious. The flames were instantly extinguished by the wind pressure, and the thick black smoke also collapsed in the wind. Chapter 434 Repairing the 3rd Engine Vortex. Is there such an operation? Looking at Caesar who blew out the fire area, Steve stood in a mess in the wind with the fire extinguisher. Captain, don't just stand there in a daze. There are enemies coming from behind you. Caesar threw down a few words immaturely, and flew directly out of the gap in the passage, leaving the helicopter carrier and hovering at an altitude of, meters, remembering to fly towards the vortex of the seriously damaged 3rd engine. Okay, hearing the reminder, Steve hurriedly looked behind him, and sure enough, he saw several armed men with guns coming in the passageway surrounded by faint smoke. The armed personnel, who were clearly dressed as S.H.I.E.L.D. agents, saw Steve holding the shield. His dark eyes gleamed coldly, and he decisively raised the gun in his hand to shoot. Is it also a person controlled by Loki? Steve thought to himself, and at the same time, he rolled tactically on the spot, quickly dodging the flying bullets, and the bullets hit the floor in the air, flashing a series of bright sparks. It's quite hot. Try this. Steve hid behind the wall of another passage, and aimed the fire extinguisher at the narrow passage where the enemy attacked. When he opened it, a violent explosion sprayed, and the white mist of dry powder immediately filled the corridor space, and the armed personnel lost almost all of their vision for a short time. As a super soldier who is very good at melee games and one to many, Captain America Steve will naturally not miss this opportunity. I saw him holding a 5-star round shield on his left arm, took a deep breath and held his breath. Breaking into the powder-scattered passage alone is a blow to those armed men whose minds are controlled. The captain of the 5/5 Open, it seems that the coping is not bad. Caesar, who was floating outside the helicopter carrier, caught a glimpse of the battle situation in the passage from the corner of his eye, and after complaining in his heart, he turned his gaze back to the 3rd engine, which was full of blasting and burning marks. The vortex of the engine is like a giant mechanical Ferris wheel. When it rotates at high speed with sufficient energy, it can generate a huge thrust to send hundreds of thousands of tons of helicopter aircraft carriers into the sky. However, in order for the helicopter carrier to fly normally, all 4 engine vortexes must keep running. Losing one of the engines, although it can still barely stay in the air, the helicopter carrier will be in a tilted state as a whole, and will continue to slowly lower its altitude. If the 2 vortex engines are scrapped at the same time, the helicopter carrier can only usher in the end of crashing. Let me see. Floating high in the air, Caesar kicked the damaged steel plate of the card's main vortex away. Seeing that there were still many steel bars sticking out of the card's main vortex, he couldn't help but narrow his bright royal blue eyes slightly. The eyes gradually turned from blue to red, and in the next moment, Caesar's eyes seemed to be burning, shooting out 2 real laser hotlines, only slightly sweeping those steel bars and steel plates, and all the obstacles made of fine steel broke apart. The notch cut by the thermal laser is flat and uniform. Cleaning is complete. Now it's time to restart the vortex engine. Caesar released his thermal vision, looked at the gap in the passage, and shouted, "Captain, how is your side?" "Not bad. How about you? Do you need my help?" Panting, Steve slapped the last armed man to the ground with a powerful shield attack, and responded loudly. Caesar ordered bluntly. You find the outer gate switch of the engine vortex at the passage next to the vortex, and pull it down to restart the vortex. Is it enough to restart the scroll switch? Steve asked casually. No, a little external force is needed to push the inner vortex. I will go inside the vortex and give it some help to push it up. As soon as Caesar finished speaking, he flew down and sank into the engine that was shaped like a giant Ferris wheel. Steve ran towards the outer brake switch in the aisle, with a worried look on his face, and reminded loudly, if the engine restarts, you will be torn to pieces by the high-speed rotating steel sheets. But I can't explain it to Kyle. Don't worry about this. Caesar rested his hands on the inner vortex, bathed in the bright sunlight, converted the energy absorbed in his body into power, and began to push the third engine with his pure strength. Crack! The little hand was slightly caught in the steel sheet, and the vortex of the third engine, which was far more than 1,000 times larger than Caesar's in volume and weight, was slowly pushed up and rotated faster and faster. Now, Captain, hearing Caesar's prompt, Steve came to the outer gate switch, grabbed the handle of the red handle, and pulled it down forcefully with both hands. Buzz buzz, the restarted vortex of the third engine, coupled with the acceleration force artificially given by Caesar, finally spun at an extreme speed independently, and the propulsion generated stopped the tendency of the helicopter carrier to tilt and descend. Caesar? Come out. Steve stood on the edge of the gap in the passage, looking at the giant vortex that was spinning fast, and the inner Caesar could no longer be seen clearly with the naked eye, which made him shout anxiously. Okay, stop shouting, your ears are deaf. Suddenly, a familiar voice came from behind Steve, along with a small white hand on his shoulder. Steve was startled, and looking back, it wasn't Caesar or anyone else. He looked at the extremely fast vortex outside the passage, and then at the floating Caesar inside the passage, and said in surprise, "Didn't you still be there just now? It was just 2 or 3 seconds ago, please. Although you have been frozen for 70 years, your reaction can't be slowed down." Caesar shrugged, but before he finished speaking with Steve, there was a sudden burst of strong vibrations from the passage leading to the interior of the aircraft carrier, accompanied by sharp and terrifying monster roars. This is, Steve and Caesar turned around with solemn expressions, and after looking at each other, they both hurried to the inner source of the earthquake at this time. On the inner ground floor of the helicopter carrier, in a dimly lit passage area. Boom boom boom. A huge and burly shadow pulled the elder on the ground, and a dark monster that seemed to come from hell was pacing forward. It is 4 meters high, its body is full of explosive lumpy muscles, and its surface is covered with a dark leather that is as tough as steel. White lines like flames are branded on its extremely strong chest, and there are several long lines on its back. 1/2 meter of sharp black barbs. Wild, strong, huge, extremely vicious, an image born purely for fighting and killing. The dark monster gritted its teeth coldly, and every step made the floor vibrate, leaving a row of deeply sunken footprints. Under some machinery and equipment on the side, Eddie and Natasha were hiding inside, their bodies curled up into a ball, goosebumps all over their bodies, and their hairs were standing on end and they couldn't stop shaking. Then, what exactly is that? After the dark monster walked away, Natasha took a breath and asked Eddie with a trembling voice. Just now, the moment Dr. Banner turned into a Hulk, its original green skin was instantly wrapped in a dark black skin, and its already tall and powerful figure swelled twice as much. Then, the dark monster roared madly, blowing up most of the entire scientific research room with one punch, and the steel in its mouth was like a tofu biscuit or something. Symbiont toxin, parasitic on Hulk. Eddie's eyes were full of fear, and he muttered to himself, "It's over, no one can stop it. Not only this helicopter carrier will be destroyed, but even the New York City below will be destroyed by it. No one knows what kind of terrifying existence it will be when the toxin and the Hulk are fused." Chapter 435 The Combination of the Hulk and the Symbiont. Helicopter aircraft carrier, in a dark corner of a certain basement. Natasha took a deep breath, with determination in her eyes. She poked her head out suddenly and got up, and walked out from the bottom of the large instrument that was originally hidden. Seeing this scene, Eddie's face was full of confusion, and he whispered eagerly, "Natasha, what are you going to do? That monster is not far from us, indeed, the combination of the Hulk and the toxin symbiote, let's call it the toxin giant. It's very terrifying, and I can't think of a way to deal with it. But because of this, I have to go out." Natasha looked back indifferently, looked at Eddie who was still trembling, and said solemnly with the determination to die, "We are members of the Avengers, If we dare not even deal with it, then this helicopter carrier can only come to the end of destruction. The greater the ability, the greater the responsibility. This is the responsibility and belief of a hero. Natasha knows this very well, so no matter what the road ahead is, she will stand up without hesitation. After all, Black Widow has been in the dark for long enough, and she wants to spend the rest of her life chasing the correct way of light. Natasha, Eddie watched helplessly as the red-haired woman, who was not much stronger than a human, rushed towards the passageway where the poisonous giant left. The roar of monsters and the screams of agents were vaguely heard, and it was obvious that the toxin giant, driven mad by anger, had begun to slaughter and destroy on the helicopter carrier. Eddie was silent for a moment, then he hammered his limp feet hard. The nails of his 5 fingers sank deep into his palm, and the tingling sensation made him expel most of the fear thoughts in his mind. That's right. Instead of sitting still, it's better to take the initiative. Toxin, you were the one who saved me in the past, but this time, I will save you. Eddie immediately acted on the idea that came to him, got up and chased in the direction Natasha left. At this time, in the underground area of the helicopter carrier. Close the floodgates everywhere, use a new type of energy weapon, mobilize the manpower again and increase the firepower for me. It must be blocked here, and it must not be allowed to go to the driving hall. More than a dozen elite SHIELD agents with tense expressions stood at the crossroads of the passage, holding strange energy guns in their hands. The atmosphere did not dare to take a breath, and patiently waited for the arrival of the target with bated breath. Boom, boom, boom. The steel deck vibrated violently and rhythmically, and at the end of the passage in the darkness, accompanied by a creepy growl, a tall and burly black shadow approached from far and near. The elite agents who formed the defense line swallowed wildly, and when the source of the shock and the sound reached their maximum value, all the movement stopped abruptly, and the passage area seemed to return to the previous peace and tranquility. The agents looked ahead in amazement. Following the focus of their eyes, a black tentacle suddenly shot out from the darkness, spanning a distance of more than 10 meters in an instant, piercing through the chests of the 2 agents at the front. The rest of the agents were stunned for a moment, then vented their fear and shouted loudly, "It's coming, shoot!" The gorgeous and terrifying laser beams, like fireworks, crazily followed the direction of the black tentacles, poured into the end of the dark passage, and intensively hit a layer of tough dark shell. The shell only slightly crumbled and shattered, and quickly turned into liquid restructuring heels. "You're lying, right?" The agent leader showed an incredible expression. "You know, they have a new type of weapon developed with Rubik's Cube, which can easily penetrate even modern armored tanks. And now, even the target's outer skin defense has not been broken." Hold head high. This action enraged the toxin giant even more, and let out a deafening roar. The roar formed a substantive ultrasonic wave, which resounded through the straight passage, and the agents subconsciously covered their ears. Under the screams of the previous 2 agents, their bodies were connected together by tentacles, and then they slammed on the walls on the left and right sides. Even though they were wearing the most sophisticated protective clothing, their human bodies were still as fragile as pulp. It was slapped into paste by the black tentacles, and scarlet blood splashed on the other agents. A dark and huge deformed monster with a whole body, showing its face from the dim light, a pair of narrow and white ruthless cold eyes, ferocious fangs dripping with mucus. The whole body is filled with a violent and wild oppressive aura, and it is still swinging at will with a few black tentacles. Toxin giant. Not only is the strength and physique multiplied on the basis of the Hulk's strength, but it also has a nearly unsolvable protective shell and the ultra-long-range ability to manipulate black thread tentacles. If the Hulk represents burning and endless anger, and the toxin symbiosis is cold and ruthless killing. When the two are integrated into one, it is a top-notch creation purely for war. If there really is a creator god, even God would regret creating this ultimate creature that can slaughter all things. Monster, absolute monster. Facing the approaching steps of the toxin giant, the remaining elite agents who fell on the ground began to tremble uncontrollably, without any thought of resisting or even fighting back. At this moment, a bullet struck from behind the toxin giant, hitting the back of its head, and the bullet landed flat, not even a tickle. But this still attracted the attention of the toxin giant. It turned around, and saw Natasha in a combat leather jacket holding a pistol, and hooked her finger at it coaxingly. "Big man, it's getting dark and the sun should be setting." Roar! The toxin giant roared angrily, and what Natasha responded to was the rapid ejection of several black thread tentacles. Natasha had no intention of fighting at all. Seeing that she had attracted the opponent's hatred, she shook her bright red hair, turned around and ran away without looking back. Natasha is in the front, and the toxin giant is behind, and the two staged a life and death chase. Although Natasha kept fleeing towards the narrow passage, the toxin giant sprinted regardless, using the body of a monster to forcibly slam into a path, constantly narrowing the distance with Natasha in front. Seeing the iron stairs appearing in front of her, Natasha sprinted faster and jumped, just in time to grab the handrail of the upper floor, but the toxin giant behind her rushed up and twisted the iron stairs at one end, because of too much force. Continued to break through 3 or 4 layers of steel inner walls. Natasha was panting heavily, clutching the handrail with one hand, her body was suspended in midair, and seeing the poison giant was about to turn back, a hand suddenly grabbed her from the upper floor. Natasha looked up, and it was Eddie who came. Eddie pulled her up vigorously, and said in a deep voice, "Natasha, you are right, we must face it. Is there any way?" Natasha stood up and asked quickly. Eddie shook his head and said, "We can't cope with its combined state. Only by separating the toxin from the Hulk can we have a chance to deal with breakthroughs one by one." "How can they be separated? Does the toxin have any weaknesses?" Natasha continued to ask. Eddie thought about it with an ugly face, his eyes lit up, and said, "As far as I know, no. But both the toxin and the Hulk are afraid of the existence of a person." "Is this considered a weakness?" "Who?" Natasha asked subconsciously. Eddie replied firmly and calmly, "Peace symbol, Kyle." Chapter 436 Killing God, the terrifying strength of the toxin giant. Owner Kyle? The expectation on Natasha's face disappeared immediately. She stared straight at the serious Eddie, and said angrily, "Are you joking? Where can I find that man now?" "Of course I know, I'm just talking." Eddie spread his hands helplessly, also feeling that he had said something useless. Everyone knows that if the peace symbol Kyle is here, he will be able to cope with it, and even completely reverse the current situation. But the problem is that the symbol of peace left the Earth 3 years ago and went to the distant and unknown Milky Way starry sky. It is not certain that he can come back safely. The evil god Loki must have heard this, so he chose to take advantage of the void with his psychic staff and alien army. When the two are talking, with a crisp crackling sound in the lower area, the toxin giant snorted hot air, and tore the steel outer wall that hindered his progress into pieces with his bare hands, protruding out a monster's head with ferocious and sharp fangs, which turned white. The long and narrow eyes raised slightly, and the figures of Eddie and Natasha were reflected in the vertical pupils. Eddie and Natasha immediately stood motionless like sculptures. Eddie's face was extremely pale. He glanced at Natasha next to him, and hinted in a low voice, "I'll count 3, 2, 1, turn around and run when I reach 1. It is good." Natasha's forehead was dripping with cold sweat, her dark red hair stuck to her beautiful face, and her body was extremely tense. Eddie over there directly called 1, and the two of them turned around and ran away in one go, as if they had practiced countless times, and ran away to the passage area behind them. The toxin giant was stunned for a moment, then roared angrily, and pulled out the heavy cylinder on the side. The object weighing more than 10 tons was lifted high like a toy, and slammed into the upper passage area. "Throw it over." Although she didn't look back, Natasha's expression changed while she was running, and she quickly pressed Eddie to the ground in an emergency response. The next moment, the steel pipe buzzed over the top of the head at high speed, and smashed hard at the entrance of the passage ahead. The steel pipe with a radius of 3 meters just blocked the escape route. At the same time, the two black-lined tentacles shot towards the backs of the two of them like bullets. With sharp eyes and quick hands, Natasha pushed Eddie suddenly with both hands, and she rolled backwards incidentally, causing the tentacles to miss and nailed to the floor. Taking advantage of this opportunity, Eddie and Natasha hurriedly got up from the ground, their backs pressed against the sealed passageway, and they held their breath as they stared at the toxin giant that pulled back its tentacles. The eyes of the toxin giant had a cold light, and mucus flowed from the fangs, completely looking at the weak prey. "It's over," Eddie smiled wryly. Natasha remained silent, and suddenly took a step forward, making a restraining movement with both hands, and said persuasively, "Banner, recall your own nature. Don't be dazzled by anger and killing. It's you. Your own body, must be in your own hands." The toxin giant stared at Natasha, and after a few seconds, he grinned ferociously, and said hoarsely, "It's a pity, now this body is under my control." "This familiar tone?" Eddie asked loudly, trembling all over, deeply surprised. "Toxin, is that you?" I'm not familiar with you. The toxin giant glanced at Eddie coldly. The smile on Eddie's face froze. He covered his chest with his right hand, and said hurtfully, "This is a bit too much. You have lived in my body for several years. You are too weak as a host, and it has no effect on my strength. Now, I feel that I am full of strength." The toxin giant clenched his dark fists and said to himself, "With such power, I can definitely defeat that man." Before the words were finished, a silver hammer flew at high speed and hit the back of the toxin giant. Eddie and Natasha dodged in time. Another underground area. The hammer quickly returned according to the original trajectory. In the passage behind, a blond man with red hair and cheeks wearing a silver armor and red cloak walked out domineeringly. He held Thor's hammer in his right hand again, looking down on the audience with a godlike attitude. "Is that man you're talking about me?" Thor, Natasha and Eddie both showed surprise when they saw the person who came. In this helicopter carrier, if anyone has the strength to stop the toxin giant, Thor from God's domain is definitely the first one that deserves it. That guy Loki ran away in chaos. "Next, I will leave it to." Saul looked at Eddie and the two, and said very stiffly, "It's just that he hasn't finished talking yet." Following the violent tremor of the aircraft carrier and the terrifying scene that seemed to be a series of explosions, a huge black shadow with afterimages flew across a distance of tens of meters, approaching Saul in the blink of an eye in front of Quick. "It's too fast." Thor opened his eyes wide in surprise, and what was reflected in his pupils was the dark and strong chest of the poisonous giant, and a palm that was big enough to wrap the body inside. It was almost a reflexive god-level reaction after many years of fighting in the starry sky. Saul instinctively swung his right hand forward, but Thor's hammer, which was wrapped with a little light, was quickly held in the palm of the dark giant hand with hammer and hand. Saul's face changed drastically, and he couldn't pull it out. Not only did the opponent burst out at speed, but his strength also far exceeded his expectations. Lightning, Thor's electric eyes shot out, holding Thor's hammer tightly. His body seemed to be transformed into the core of thunder, and the whole body exploded and entangled with thunder and lightning. Thunder and lightning poured into the toxin giant's body through Saul's right hand and Thor's hammer, but the toxin giant grinned grinningly, and his muscles were only slightly sluggish due to lightning paralysis. The palm did not let go of Saul's right hand at all, but a little bit lifted his whole body off the ground. A mere ant, pretending to be a god, the toxin giant grinned, using Saul as a hammer, spinning crazily in the air, driving the strong wind to huddle, and then suddenly slapped down on the floor. Crack! As if the sound of bone cracking sounded, the main aircraft carrier trembled slightly, and the flat steel floor immediately dented a human-shaped silhouette. The toxin giant came back again and again, swung Saul like a chicken, and slapped him hard back and forth on the floor. The red blood of the protist splashed everywhere until the electric light wrapped around his body was completely dimmed. "It's too cruel." Natasha couldn't bear to look directly. "If this continues, he will die." Eddie gritted his teeth and said, "But we have no choice. Even with a finger, we can't catch it." Boom. Finally, Thor was thrown on the uneven ground, and the toxin giant looked down at him indifferently. At this time, Saul was no longer the invincible and heroic figure of Thor a few seconds ago. I saw Saul's eyes were gray and dim, his suspicious life lay limp on the ground, his blonde hair was messy covering his face, there was sticky blood on the corner of his mouth, and the silver armor he was wearing was full of cracks, which were shockingly scarred. The winner is determined in a blink of an eye. It cannot be said that Thor is too weak, it can only be said that he is a little careless, and the toxin giant is too strong in the melee field. Strong enough to represent the ceiling of this galaxy universe. Chapter 437 Caesar vs. Toxin Giant. In the underground area of the aircraft carrier. I'm Thor, the invincible Thor, and it's not over yet. Saul lay on the floor, barely opened his mouth, his right hand was trembling, facing the poisonous giant standing in front. He slowly raised the Thor's hammer he was still holding. If you can see it. At this time, on the outer dome of the helicopter carrier, in the sky above, meters, dark clouds suddenly condensed under the divine power, and the inner lightning and thunder seemed to represent the wrath of the heavens. Seeing that the thunder was about to gather into a ball, it slashed straight down towards the helicopter carrier. In the basement inside the helicopter carrier, a big dark foot stepped on Saul's chest fiercely, making him grunt in pain. Covered with scars, his strong body sank deep into the floor. "It's a pity, it's just a little bit," Thor whispered weakly, unwillingly. His body trembled slightly and he lost consciousness, his high-hanging right hand sank, and he let go of Thor's hammer by the way. The thunderclouds in the sky disintegrated without a trace in an instant, and the bright sun once again bathed the helicopter carrier unimpeded. The toxin giant looked down at Thor's hammer, held the handle of the hammer with one hand, and as his body exerted force, his feet sank into the steel floor with a click, but Thor's hammer in his hand remained motionless. God's domain artifacts like Thor's hammer, after being cursed by the Heavenly Father-level Odin, can no longer be controlled purely by strength, and only those who are worthy of it can pick it up. In just a second, the toxin giant gave up. It stretched out a finger towards Sol, who was unconscious. The sharp, dark nails were like blades, and they pressed against Sol's neck, slashing across from top to bottom. The battle armor was divided into two, exposing the strong upper body with the bumpy abdominal muscles. Toxin, what do you want to do? Eddie asked in surprise. Did he claim to be a Protoss? I want to taste what the flesh and head of a Protoss would taste like. The toxin giant grinned grinningly, with mucus dripping from its jagged fangs, and regarded Thor on the ground as a Chinese food. You can't do this, wake up, Banner. Natasha's face was pale and bloodless, and she knelt on the ground, trying to awaken the consciousness of Dr. Banner in her original body. I will do this, and when I eat him, I will eat you too, the toxin giant said cruelly, using his nails as a weapon blade, lifted it up slightly, and then ruthlessly poked at Sol's chest. As the strongest creature in the universe, he must complete the baptism of killing gods. Do not, Natasha yelled in horror, seeing that the poisonous giant was about to kill Thor. At this critical moment, an object flew out from the side passage, just holding the dark nails for Thor underneath. The toxin giant lowered his eyes angrily, and saw that what blocked his nails was a round shield engraved with 5 stars, which just covered Sol's chest. For the current toxin giant, steel is as fragile as paper, but after resisting its nails, the round shield is only left with a smear of white spots. This is, Natasha and Eddie raised their heads excitedly, and saw a young man in a blue tights at the entrance of the opposite passage. He was panting obviously just in time. Team leader, that? I'm not late, am I? The corners of Steve's mouth rose slightly. An old and immortal soldier. The toxin giant's ugly face was ferocious, with angry hot steam spraying from its mouth and nose, and its hands were clenched again into fists the size of a human being. I forgot, I'm not the only one here, Steve shrugged, and pointed to the top of the poisonous giant's head. Huh? The toxin giant looked up in surprise. A small fist was infinitely magnified in its huge white eyes, and the end of the fist was carrying a swift and violent hurricane. Boom. As if the toxin giant had been hit hard like never before, its body was severely suppressed to the floor, and a huge hole was formed in the floor, causing it to fall downwards, smashing through several floors in a row before being able to stop. You guys really make people worry. Childish words resounded in the room, and Caesar was seen floating in the air, holding the 5-star round shield in one hand, and Saul's belt in the other, and landed lightly on the edge of the hole. Master, Eddie let out a long sigh of relief, slid his back against the wall, and then said in a little embarrassment, well, poison it, I already know. Caesar nodded and threw the buckler back to Steve, setting Saul down in front of Eddie and Natasha. He turned his back and faced the abyss-like hole directly, and said in a childish yet firm tone, since I'm here, it's fine. That punch just now, I knew that you have been hiding your strength. Eddie forced a smile. This is it. Natasha stared blankly at Caesar's back. For some reason, the small figure in front of her eyes overlapped with a tall figure with the invincible posture in her memory. Caesar, what should we do with that monster? With a buckler in hand, Steve walked to the edge of the hole, looking down at the dimly lit subterranean area below. Since it is close to the bottom of the helicopter carrier, most of the bottom is machinery and equipment. To be honest, I don't know too well. The combination of Hulk and Toxin is really a headache. Caesar frowned slightly, and lightly clenched his fists, not knowing whether his undeveloped body could withstand high-load fighting. For the time being, give it a try. After all, in the field of close combat, there is absolutely no reason to lose with the superhuman blood of the Avatar. Thinking of this, Caesar suddenly remembered something, looked at Thor's hammer on the ground, and opened his right hand slightly. An artifact picked up for nothing, don't use it for nothing. Under the surprised gazes of the three of Steve, Thor's hammer suddenly floated up and flew into Caesar's hand automatically. His little hand was just barely able to hold the hammer firmly. Sizzling thunder and lightning, from Thor's hammer, rushed into Caesar's body continuously. Maybe, with the power of thunder? Sensing the surging thunder energy, Caesar blinked his eyes slightly in surprise. his blue eyes slightly glowing with daylight. He can convert energy into internal power. With Thor's hammer in his hand, it is equivalent to carrying a universal power bank. Captain, take them back to the main driving hall, and I will lure the toxin giant away. Caesar held the hammer in his hand, his body floated up, and he wanted to actively sink into the hole. Caesar, I will lend you this for the time being. Steve threw out the round shield in his hand, and Caesar was not polite, wrapped it around his slender left arm, and entered the hole fully armed like this. Eddie and Natasha supported each other, while Steve came to Saul and carried Saul, who was still unconscious, on his back. Steve took the lead and urged, "Hurry up, the battle is about to begin. I'm afraid this part of the area will be affected by the fall. We have to rush to the main driving hall, and we don't know what's going on there now." Eddie walked through the hole in the floor, worried. "Captain, that monster, young master, can he do it alone? I don't know too well, but it's a pity that we are all burdens here." Steve sighed softly, walked ahead, and said inexplicably, "But I trust him." "Me too." Natasha nodded in agreement. Both of them saw some secrets from Caesar. Chapter 438 Fight, the Obsession in the Poisonous Heart. Caesar held the 5-star round shield in his left hand and Thor's hammer in his right, and flew down from the hole continuously. The bottom of the helicopter carrier was pitch black, with only the cumbersome sound of machinery and cylinders running continuously. The huge pit originally caused by the toxin giant's fall was now empty and lost its target. "Are you waiting for me?" Caesar's sapphire blue eyes were slightly bright, and the darkness couldn't affect his superhuman vision. He glanced around a little, and he easily remembered the layout of the space he was in. It can be seen that inside the underground layer, there are more sticky black lines, intertwined vertically and horizontally, densely forming dark spider webs, sealing the entrances and exits of various passages, so that this area has turned into a spider web trap. There was only a height of more than, meters above, and from the hole openings on the upper floors, a dim beam of light with a radius of about 3 meters shone down, which just shrouded Caesar's small figure. "Toxin, when did you learn this ability?" "I remember that Eddie never told me about it." Caesar was not flustered either, his small face was unusually calm, and he looked at a corner of the dark area beside him in amazement. The spider web. To be reasonable, it appeared a little earlier. Following Caesar's words, dull footsteps sounded from the dark corner, and the steel deck trembled slightly with its own shock source. The burly and frightening body of the toxin giant appeared, baring its yellow and white fangs ferociously, and said hoarsely, "Of course you don't know. Because in the past few years, I have never believed in you, Caesar, including the former host, Eddie." "Toxin, what do you mean?" Caesar raised his eyes and looked at the toxin giant peacefully at a distance of 10 meters. Now standing in front of him, even though it is the combined creation of Banner, Hulk, and Toxin, but at this stage, Banner and the Hulk are in a stalemate with each other, and the toxin added by the third party undoubtedly completely controls the dominance of this invincible body. The toxin giant's humanized spread hands did not show the slightest loss of control or anger, and he said calmly, "Caesar, over the years, I have been in Eddie's body and have been witnessing your growth. To be honest, I am completely attracted by you. I was frightened by the potential. I have seen countless strong fighters on Sokka, and I have traveled through the Milky Way and known many alien races. But I have never seen you like this. What about me? I'm a child," Caesar bickered. "Child?" The toxin giant smiled coldly, and said hoarsely, "Can the child send an out-of-control civil aviation plane back to the ground at an altitude of, meters? Can the child raise an erupting active volcano to the ground? Can the child scuba dive pirates from 1,000 meters deep sea?" The boat pushed out of the water. "Caesar, it's not so much that the Hulk and I are monsters. You are the real monster hidden in the earth. I have been trying to find a way to defeat you, but as time went by, I stopped on Eddie, and you keep growing and getting stronger, and I'm getting more and more desperate about it." The toxin giant paused, clenched his fists, and growled unwillingly, "I've come to realize that I can't become stronger by staying with Eddie all the time, and wanting to beat you is even more of a luxury," Caesar suddenly said. "So it was like this. So you carried Eddie behind your back and secretly sent you to other humans?" "Yes." The toxin giant raised its hand slightly, and several black threads shot out from the wrist, nailed into the edge of the hole in the ceiling above, weaved into a net at a speed visible to the naked eye, and sealed the final portal that could escape. Now, there are only strands of beams of light passing through the gaps in the dark net, and the light and shadows fall on Caesar and the poisonous giant in a changing manner. The toxin giant tore off the black sticky thread on his hand, looked at the dark spider silk and said, "This ability move was developed by me leaning over a boy in Queens, New York half a year ago and plundering jeans. Although I like straight, there are direct and direct offensive methods, but in order to defeat you, I will use all means regardless." Its tone is indifferent but firm, without anger or out of control, but with almost crazy obsession. "Yet, I already feel your difficulty." Caesar narrowed his eyes solemnly. Because of the powerful aura of the other party, his body was also tense to the extreme due to tension and pressure. It's not scary for the Hulk to go crazy. What's scary is that an existence far stronger than the Hulk actually thinks about tactics calmly. "So, let's get started and have a good fight here." The toxin giant stretched out its scarlet tongue, licking its fangs excitedly, and its huge dark muscular body squatted down slightly. "Well, wait first," Caesar coughed and said with doubts, "I still have 2 questions. 1. Are you really controlled by Loki? 2. Why do you want to defeat me?" "Before I answer my question, I will not fight with you. Call taxi. You are so petite, why do you talk so much?" The toxin giant was a little impatient, and sneered, "As for that arrogant guy like Loki, he just used him to gain the power of the spiritual staff because of the same purpose as him, so that my strength can be one step closer to yours. As for why I want to defeat you, I know, I will never see that man's back if I don't step over your mountain first." With a long tail sound, the toxin giant suddenly moved, and giant footprints were stepped on the floor in place. It was obviously strong and bloated, but it exploded at a supersonic terrifying speed, turning into a black streamer and bombarding Caesar. "Yes. Then, as you wish." Caesar's reaction action formed an afterimage equally quickly, without the intention of retreating or dodging. Carrying the round shield in his left hand, it turned into a golden streamer to meet the poisonous giant. Between lightning and flint, a huge dark fist, with a 5-star round shield on one side, as if sparks collided with the earth and smashed together. Then, the toxin giant and Caesar, one big and one small, vaguely emerged from the air, and neither of them played fancy things. It was a fight of the strongest explosive power from the beginning. Obviously, it was just an explosion of power in melee combat. The moment the fist tip and the shield surface came into contact, the air exploded inch by inch with the battle situation as the center, and the shock wave transmitted by the force was weakened layer by layer through spider webs. At this time, it is located in the wide passage on the upper deck of the aircraft carrier. Steve walked ahead with Saul on his back, while Natasha and Eddie followed behind, constantly heading for the main pilot hall, which is the center of the aircraft carrier. Almost there, Steve looked at the corner of the passage not far ahead, and was about to continue walking, but the aircraft carrier suddenly shook tremblingly, causing the 3 of them to hold on to the wall to stand firm. This is just the beginning. Immediately afterwards, the helicopter carrier trembled without stopping, causing the objects and corpses in the carrier to roll on the ground. The source of the earthquake comes from the bottom of the aircraft carrier. Natasha put her palm against the inner wall and quickly came to a conclusion through observation. Steve looked at the inside of the trembling aircraft carrier and sighed. "It's Caesar, they're fighting. There is no room for anyone to intervene in this battle between monsters." If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelis. There you'll find the original version of this story, and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 439. Between the capital city of New York and the ocean, there are dark clouds, and the sky is vast at an altitude of, meters. The sun shone on the helicopter carrier, the black steel shell reflected the cold light, and the 4 engines whirled together, directly smashing the wind and clouds in a radius of 1 kilometer. In such an ultra-modern military fortress, at this moment, shock waves that are visible to the naked eye originate from the bottom of the aircraft carrier, and affect the entire aircraft carrier like a tide. The constant tremors and swaying of the helicopter carrier caused a mess of people and things inside. Loki's escape is only the beginning of the war. In other words, Loki was deliberately arrested at the beginning, took the opportunity to come to the temporary base of S.H.I.E.L.D. An uncontrollable monster called the Toxin Giant exists. Everything is to prevent the Earthlings from destroying their great plans. Helicopter aircraft carrier on the open deck. Wearing a golden armor and a cloak, Luoji was standing on the edge of the deck. His black hair was disheveled by the head-on wind. Feeling the aftermath of the fight from the bottom, He couldn't help but smile evilly. That's not right, killing each other, always it's your human inferiority, really, a faint voice suddenly came from behind. Loki looked back with a stiff face, and saw one of Director Fury's left and right hands, Agent Coulson, who stood up behind him at some point, holding a charged gun in both hands, and the muzzle of the gun was facing faintly he. Agent Coulson asked coldly, that arrogance is the inferiority of false gods like you. Raise your hand, what kind of weapon is that? Loki looked at the strangely shaped firearm, sensing a dangerous aura from it, and subconsciously raised his hands high in obedience, but secretly began to cast God's domain spells. It's built with the energy developed by the Rubik's Cube. Do you want to taste its power? Agent Coulson said indifferently. Then you don't have to. Loki showed a strange smile, and his body suddenly disappeared out of thin air. Agent Coulson's face changed slightly, and then he felt a chill behind him, and some kind of sharp weapon pierced his back. Pada. The charged weapon fell on the edge of the deck, and as the deck shook violently, it jumped out of the deck after a few bounces. Agent Coulson groaned in pain, his body struggled and twitched continuously, and the blood-stained dagger protruding from his chest was bringing out a steady stream of blood. Loki kept smiling wickedly, pushed forward against his body with a sharp weapon, and pushed it to the edge of the aircraft carrier deck. Unfortunately, we have the capital of arrogance, Loki whispered, and decisively pulled out the golden dagger, pushing Agent Coulson off the deck, rolling down to the black roaring thundercloud below. Call, a figure quickly passed by Loki's side, and jumped off the deck without hesitation. He was in the air, and the mechanical instrument on his back spread his steel wings member. Falcon, Loki sneered again and again, sneak attacking me was the most correct choice, but you ran to save the weak who were dying. This is also one of your stubborn bad habits. A black fighter plane approached the helicopter carrier, and the rear hatch opened. The scientist who was also mind-controlled respected Loki on the deck. Master Loki, I'm here to pick you up. Loki nodded coldly. Jump into the back cabin of the fighter plane, look down at the aircraft carrier in constant dispute, and ask the Boeing scientist, are you all ready? The scientist nodded hastily, everything is ready. There's still room to provide energy, so you can activate the Rubik's Cube and open the interstellar portal as you wish. Very good, now go to Stark Tower immediately, Loki ordered with a smile. Understood, the scientist led the order to retreat. The rear tail compartment was gradually closed, and the black fighter plane carried Rocky, flew away from the helicopter carrier, and headed towards New York City. After a few seconds, the steel wings pierced through the dark clouds, and Falcon Sam, holding the seriously injured and unconscious Agent Coulson, flew out of the thundercloud of lightning and thunder, and landed on the trembling aircraft carrier deck. He looked at the black fighter plane that disappeared into the clouds, quickly turned on the communicator, and reported, Captain, it's me, Sam. Loki has already left the aircraft carrier in the fighter plane. There are wounded on my side, so I can't track it. Understood. I also have wounded on my hands, and there is an extremely difficult person here, on the other side of the communicator, in the passage area near the main driving hall. Steve hung up the communicator, carrying Saul, who was still not awake, on his back, staring straight ahead solemnly. Eddie and Natasha, who followed closely behind, also stopped their hasty pace. 10 meters away, a black-haired agent in a black uniform confronted the three of them. He was guarding Steve and the others coldly, holding a special longbow in his left hand, and reaching for the quiver on his back with the other hand. Barton, Natasha couldn't help walking forward, but was quickly stopped by Steve's hand. Wait a minute, he's obviously still under control. I understand. Natasha took a deep breath and calmed down. Her beautiful eyes met Hawkeye Barton's, and said slowly, do you remember me? Barton, we are real teammates. Barton remained silent, looking at Natasha. A rippling flashed in his dark eyes, and he actually retracted his right hand that was stretched back. You still remember? Natasha just let out a breath, but Barton's eyes suddenly turned cold. He quickly pulled out a few arrows with his right hand, nailed them into the inner walls on both sides, and then turned and ran without looking back. Careful, looking at the beeping special arrow, Steve let out an exclamation, and threw himself back, knuckling Natasha and Eddie to the ground immediately afterwards. The special arrow nailed to the wall started to detonate like a high-explosive bomb, and the area of the baptism passageway was surrounded by flames and explosive waves. Poor Thor acted as a human shield, adding to his wounds. When the three of Steve coughed and got up from the ground, Hawkeye Button had long since disappeared in the passage. Follow. Steve put Saul on his back again, and said in a deep voice, "He went to the main driving hall, I go." Natasha gritted her teeth, and rushed to the main driving hall regardless of her injuries. The current main driver's hall is no longer as clean and orderly as it used to be. Various documents and chairs are tilted here and there. Fortunately, the computer control equipment has not been damaged. Director Fury stood on the platform in the center of the hall, commanding the staff to maintain the normal navigation of the helicopter carrier, and dispatched special agents to let them clean up the enemies that had sneaked into the carrier. Agent Hill was standing beside Fury, looking around vigilantly. At this moment, she saw a familiar figure appearing from the door out of the corner of her eye, aiming towards this direction with a bow, and couldn't help being horrified. "Block your body from Fury. There are enemies." As soon as the words fell, Bart the Hawkeye who entered the hall had already shot his first arrow. The arrow narrowly passed Agent Hill's head, as if it missed by mistake. But how is this possible? That is the arrow of the Eagle Eye. Agent Hill looked back and saw that the staff in the lobby were in a mess, and the arrow was inserted into the central console, and the modified arrow was inserted into the jack without deviation. Turn into flower screen. Emergency procedure activated. Turn off the first and second engine vortex. Chapter 440 Falling, Caesar's True Strength. In the main driving hall, the alarm lights in various corners flashed randomly, and the chaotic hall suddenly fell silent when they heard the prompt that the engine turbine was shut down. From Chief Fury to the staff, Kiki held his breath nervously. The helicopter carrier has only 4 vortex engines in total, and the damage to one of the engines just now has seriously affected the normal navigation of the entire carrier, and at the height of the sky of, meters, half of the engine vortex is turned off at the same time. What does that mean? It is estimated that no one knows. If you can definitely see it from the outside, the power source of the helicopter carrier at this time, the first and second vortex engines on the same side gradually stop rotating, leaving only the third and fourth engines on the other side running at high load. But the boost of 2 engines alone is not enough to keep the helicopter carrier afloat. As the helicopter carrier trembled violently again, it then tilted to the side where it lost its power source, and soon exceeded an angle of more than 30 degrees. The vortex of the 2 stopped engines dragged the aircraft carrier like a burden, and began to crash down towards the thunderclouds and land below. "Wow, be careful, everyone catch things." There were constant screams in the main driver's hall. The originally smooth steel floor was now a deadly shaking slope. Coupled with the weightlessness of falling, the people and objects inside kept sliding to one side, and most of them were piled up on the floor-to-ceiling windows at the bottom superior. Some SHIELD personnel who responded quickly used fixed equipment and walls as handrails to stabilize their bodies in a thrilling manner. When the aircraft carrier tilted and fell, Barton shot an arrow in time and nailed it to the ceiling. The tail of the arrow dragged a steel cable, and the tail end was connected to his waist, thereby suspending himself in mid-air in the hall. His eyes were as black as ink. With no emotion on his face, he pulled out a modified arrow again, put it on the bowstring, and aimed it at the bridge that controlled the vortex operation of the third and fourth engines. His intentions were fully exposed. "This is the end of the mission, Lord Loki," Barton whispered lightly, and shot the arrow decisively, but the arrow flew halfway, and a pistol was thrown from above, intercepting the arrow without hesitation. Barton looked up to the top of his head, and saw a black figure descending vigorously from the highest passageway, with bright red short hair fluttering wildly. The delicate long legs wrapped in tight black leather clothes kicked Barton's wrist with a strong wind, just enough to kick the special effects bow in his hand out. "You?" Barton's eyes sharpened, and he fought back with his fist, but the flexibility of the opponent's body was amazing. The moment he avoided the attack, his slender legs clamped his arm, and the other leg wrapped around his neck. "Use limbs as weapons, Titan." It was the Black Widow Natasha who came. She bound Barton with her feet and grabbed the steel cable with her hands. The two of them were suspended in the air in the hall together, swinging left and right like a pendulum, and said coldly, "I'm not awake yet." "What?" "Patton." Barton struggled with both hands, but his neck was strangled, his face was flushed with suffocation, he couldn't breathe normally with all his strength, and his resistance became more and more attenuated. In the process, the originally pitch-black eyes gradually regained their clarity and radiance. Barton gave up all resistance and patted Natasha's shoulder lightly. Natasha seemed to feel it, and let go of the legs that strangled her neck. Barton just coughed a few times and breathed heavily. "Thank you, you're welcome." Knowing that Barton regained consciousness, Natasha couldn't help but breathe a sigh of relief, and looked up at the entrance of the passage, only to see Steve carrying Saul on his back, and Eddie. The two of them entered the hall leaning on the sloping wall. "You can count." Director Fury at the corner saw a few people, and the solemnity on his face faded a little. He turned his eyes to Agent Hill, who climbed to the bridge, and asked loudly, "How about it? Can you restart the two vortex engines?" Agent Hill supported the bridge, pulled out the arrow stuck on it, and quickly bounced with one hand and 5 fingers to manipulate the virtual screen, and replied, "It can be restarted, but it will take time. At least 3 minutes, 7 minutes." Director Fury frowned deeply at this moment. The aircraft carrier apparently fell into the thunder cloud, and the sound of thunder was endless, and several lightning bolts directly struck the floor-to-ceiling windows. Shocking cracks burst out of the toughened glass. The people lying on the floor-to-ceiling windows screamed again and again, and climbed to higher places on the sloping floor. Agent Hill hurriedly said, "With this falling speed, let alone 3 minutes, we crashed with the aircraft carrier in about 2 minutes. In such a short period of time, it is too late to evacuate by flying a fighter plane or request support." Director Fury was talking to himself, thinking about the solution calmly, but even if he racked his brains, in their current situation, it seemed that they had no other choice but to wait for death. Many SHIELD personnel looked at the thunder clouds that were constantly receding outside, already weeping in despair. After all, manpower is limited. It is not easy to stop an aircraft carrier with hundreds of tons from falling. "I'm sorry, it's all my fault." Recalling what he had done, Barton covered his face with his hands and blamed himself immensely. "It's not your fault. You were controlled by Loki." Natasha took a deep breath and looked at Steve. "What should we do now, Captain?" "Let me think." Steve handed Saul to Eddie, touched his chin with his hand, and Kyle's face flashed across his mind for the first time, and he shook his head quickly. "Even if Kyle is here, it can't solve the current mess, right? What's more, others are not on the Earth now." Steve suddenly remembered something, took out a small flip phone from his trouser pocket, and dialed a series of phone numbers. After the phone rang for a few seconds, it got through, and Caesar's slightly immature response sounded, "Captain, I'm still busy here, don't you feel it?" As if obeying his words, the bottom of the falling helicopter carrier roared and trembled again, which was far more terrifying than a lightning strike. The first and second engine systems were hacked, and the helicopter carrier we were on was falling. Steve delivered the urgent message succinctly, and even he didn't know why he thought of Caesar at this moment. "You know, those children who are a few years old are fighting against the invincible toxin giants at the bottom. I felt it a long time ago. Don't worry. With me here, everything will be fine." Caesar's words were mature and firm, making it unbelievable. He is only less than 5 years old, and at the same time he is fighting against the strongest creatures. Where does his confidence come from? Steve had so many thoughts running through his mind that he finally chose to believe it. "Do you believe me?" Of course, 70 years ago, on the runaway train, that life and death conversation echoed in Steve's ears again. So, the corners of Steve's mouth curled up, and he hung up the flip phone in his hand. Natasha looked at him in bewilderment. "You'll know in a while." Steve looked out the window, which was still falling, his hands quietly clenched. The bottom of the helicopter carrier, in the dark space enclosed by the dark spider web. "How dare you answer the phone when you are fighting with me? Please be serious." It sounded like a monster's roar. The toxin giant blasted out a powerful punch, knocking Caesar into the air, and there were still a few circles of white waves and strong wind at the end of the fist. It took a step forward, stepped on the 5-star round shield on the ground, and even its feet sank into the floor with force. Caesar smashed into the tough dark spider web, smashed through 2 walls in a row, and then stopped. Seriously, eyes ignited with a dazzling red light, Caesar tore off the spider web hanging from his body and got up, suddenly threw the Thor's hammer aside, and smiled innocently. "Actually, I'm not in the mood to continue playing with you anymore." Chapter 441 Falling, Caesar's True Strength. Oh, seeing Caesar take the initiative to throw Thor's hammer away, the poisonous giant's hideous face showed a hint of surprise and disappointment, and the soles of his feet seemed to be glued to the floor as stable as Mount I. The toxin giant turned a blind eye to the fall of the helicopter carrier where it was located, and the weightless environment did not have the slightest actual impact on it. It spit out a mouthful of saliva that corroded the floor, stared at Caesar's tiny body with pale eyes, and said hoarsely, "Without the shield under my feet that can remove the power and impact, and the hammer that can emit lightning, how can you fight me when you are already at a disadvantage?" At present, the 1-meter-thick deck floor and the surrounding basement covered with dark spider webs, After a fierce collision game just now, are full of potholes, and some deep holes can see the lightning and thunder outside thundercloud. After the thunderclouds, there is a land where city lights can be seen faintly. As Captain America said, the time left for Caesar and this helicopter carrier is running out. The air flies outwards, and the strong wind howls inwards, forming this vicious cycle in the underground space that is the battle situation. I didn't need any weapons in the first place. This body itself is the strongest weapon, Caesar smiled. During the battle just now, his shirt and t-shirt were torn, like a few pieces of cloth hanging on his body. He simply tore off his jacket completely, exposing his upper body like the poisonous giant. The toxin giant's eyes widened slightly, and he saw that the body of Caesar's 5-year-old child was not as wide and fragile as it looked. The abdominal muscles are made of steel, tight and strong. After long-term exposure to the sun, they have been dyed an extremely healthy bronze color. Even in the impact energy battle that ranged from tens of tons to hundreds of tons just now, the small handicraft-like body in front of him didn't suffer any wounds. Strong, extraordinary, with a sense of power, there is no doubt that the body of steel, this is not a body that a child can have. Time is running out, I'm on it, poison. Caesar smiled brilliantly at the poisonous giant, and just as he assumed a stance ready to sprint, his body instantly disappeared from the original place, leaving only a violent wave of violent air surging from the original place. So fast, the toxin giant's pupils contracted suddenly, and in the blink of an eye, Caesar teleported to the vicinity of his chest, and blasted a fist that was far more shocking than a cannonball. Caesar used to rely on Thor's hammer as the main attack, and Captain America's buckler as a defense. This is the first time he has relied on his body to launch an offensive. It came just right. The toxin giant let out a low growl. Its body was obviously bloated, but it was faster than lightning. Its extremely thick dark arms thrust forward, and instinctively counterattacked temporarily with its fists. If it's melee combat, it has absolutely no reason to cower and lose. Between the lightning and flint, two fists, one big and one small, were completely disproportionately clashing together this moment. The figures of the toxin giant and Caesar froze, and everything around them, including the time and the environment, froze silently then. Two groups of light waves, one black and one white, shine, collide, entangle, and finally detonate on the ends of two fists of different sizes. It is just a confrontation of pure power, but it is like a collision of high-tech missiles. As if several tons of explosives were compressed into a tiny group of energy and shock waves, centered on the two of them like a tide, they spread out layer upon layer from the air. Boom! Several tough dark spider webs were directly broken, and the first steel wall was even festered by the aftermath. In the main driving hall, the terrifying aftermath and vibrations were clearly conveyed here. The floor and ceiling shook like an earthquake, the people and equipment inside were suddenly thrown into the air, and they kept rolling in the room due to weightlessness. Wow! Eddie flew down from the opening of the passage, and was quickly grabbed by the collar by a strong arm. Steve held him and Saul in his hand, and the other hand grabbed the handle of the door. Hold on! Steve's face sank like water, and he looked out of the floor-to-ceiling windows below. The helicopter carrier had already passed through the thunderclouds and dropped to an altitude of 7,000 meters, and further down was the outskirts of the city dotted with lights. Trust him, now, only trust him, Natasha put her hands on Barton's neck and said in a deep voice. The seemingly even boxing confrontation is just the beginning. Caesar, who was suspended in midair, did not retreat. His left fist was still on the end of the giant fist, and his clenched right fist was raised. Under the surprised eyes of the poisonous giant, he blasted towards its chest again before he could gather any strength. Go! You guy! The toxin giant gritted his teeth, reacted extremely quickly, and raised his fist again to receive the punch. The two fists intersected, and a powerful shock wave similar to that just erupted, setting off circles of white airwaves that violently slapped on the damaged wall. Caesar's small face remained unchanged, his body was steady in the air, and he repeated the movements of retracting and punching his fists. The attack was swift and powerful, without dragging the ground. For a while, after images formed on his small arms, and he blasted the fist like a cannonball forward out. The poisonous giant's expression gradually changed. It thought that the punch infused with mighty power was the opponent's big move, but now it realized that it was just an ordinary little basic attack. Every shot is a punch beyond, percent strength. When such a torrent of attacks to achieve a combo. The toxin giant kept swinging its fists to parry, but sweat dripped down from its forehead, and it began to breathe heavily with extremely high heat. The collision of Superman's boxing plunged the basement into a stormy tornado, and the strong aftermath tore through the steel walls, revealing gaps that could be seen on the land and in the sky at first. The toxin giant can still keep up with the rhythm, but in the continuous high-intensity confrontation, it feels that its huge limbs are becoming more and more cumbersome, and it is difficult to keep up with Caesar's boxing movements in front of it. Caesar, on the other hand, seemed tireless, punching out mechanically, with no tendency to stop at all. Boom. Finally, he didn't block a punch, and Caesar's small fist landed on the chest of the toxin giant. The super strong muscles that can't even deal with the laser are trembling at this moment. And the aftermath burst out from its back through its body. "You bastard," the toxin giant snorted in pain, and took half a step back. The soles of its feet even dented the steel floor. It puffed up its chest angrily, and wanted to fight back, but Caesar rushed forward instead, and the small fists came one after another with a mighty force. Boom, boom, boom. A few more punches violently landed on the toxin giant's raised chest, breaking its renewed vigor and completely shattering its proud and invincible belief. "Caesar, you," the toxin giant let out a depressing growl, and kept backing away, while Caesar approached step by step. It stretched out its hand weakly, trying to grab Caesar, but the huge dark palm was pushed back without any suspense. Caesar's eyes glowed red. Taking this opportunity, his small muscles bulged, and his fist landed on the undefended chest of the toxin giant. The ultra-fast frequency of more than 10 punches in 1 second punched it 4 meters to the flesh. The tall body kept suppressing and retreating backwards. The toxin giant's feet plowed furrows, and it backed up until its back touched the last wall of the helicopter carrier, and the wall began to crack with cracks. It is constantly waiting for the opportunity, but in the end, only deep despair and comprehension are ushered in. "It's over," Caesar whispered softly, looking at the toxin giant. He kept punching, but became more swift and irritable. Every punch changed the air pressure and wind direction in the basement. "Sure enough, Caesar, it is you, more powerful," the toxin giant roared, and before he could finish speaking, the steel wall collapsed, and its huge, dark body flew out. Still in the air, the toxin giant split into two, turning into a sticky dark liquid and the big green Hulk respectively, rolling and flying downwards. Chapter 442 Superhuman Power. Severely damaged deck gaps. Caesar stood alone on the edge of the deck, his upper body naked and his abdominal muscles exposed, and wisps of heat steamed from his bronze-colored body surface. His chest was heaving and unsteady, and his hands were still clenched. He was clearly less than 1 meter short, but at this moment he looked like an invincible god of war. Caesar looked at the toxin giant flying out of the aircraft carrier. The bloated and huge body was split into two, and it returned to the original form of toxin and Hulk. He took a long breath, and his highly tense body and mind relaxed a little. But as soon as he relaxed, the pain, hunger, tiredness, and the exhaustion and emptiness of the energy in his body came like a tide. Although defeating the toxin giant is so simple and straightforward, in fact, the battle just now has exhausted all of Caesar's strength and background. Including the thunder energy sucked and absorbed from the core of Thor's hammer, it is also converted into biological energy and strength in the body, completely squandering it. Without the energy supply of Thor's hammer, the outcome of this game of life and death would be hard to say. This is the end. Caesar was sweating profusely, and felt that the strength in his body had been drained. It was the first time since his clone recovered, he felt so weak and powerless. His eyelids were heavy like lead, and his consciousness became more and more blurred. No matter how strong the blood flowing in the body is inhumanly strong, but this body has not yet fully developed. Caesar slowly closed his eyes, and fell forward, falling from the damaged gap in the deck. As soon as he got out of the helicopter carrier, he was wrapped in the strong wind outside and fell down. His blonde hair was blown messy. Since the helicopter carrier still has 2 vortex thrusters, the falling speed is half a beat slower than that of the free-falling Caesar. A tilted helicopter carrier, and a comatose Caesar. The two fell up and down, and when the height dropped sharply to about 3,000 meters, the forests, lakes, towns, etc. on the land below became more and more clearly visible. People working in the outskirts of New York City can be seen on this morning just by looking up. Like a fortress, but larger than a fortress, like an island, but more distinct than an island, the helicopter carrier created by the top technology on the Earth, dragging black smoke, and falling from the sky to block the sky. In the main driving hall, Can you restart the engine in time, Hill? Director Fury looked ugly, looking at the approaching ground below, and then at Agent Hill at the bridge. Agent Hill's face was extremely pale, and he shook his head at him. It will take more than a minute, and I can't catch up. In half a minute, the aircraft carrier will touch the ground and crash. Is that the end of it? Commissioner Fury smiled bitterly, holding the handrail steel pipe tightly with both hands, so that the knuckles of his fingers were faintly white. Once the helicopter carrier crashes, the ammunition loaded inside will detonate without any suspense, blasting everything within a radius of more than 10 kilometers from the crash site into nothingness. The staff of S.H.I.E.L.D. on this aircraft carrier, as well as members of the Avengers, suffered heavy casualties, not to mention there is no one to stop the evil god Loki. After he opens the interstellar portal, the alien army will occupy and slaughter this blue planet. After this battle ends here, the human race on Earth will go to extinction. Hateful. Clutching the iron doorknob with one hand, Steve blushed slightly. His tall body was hanging at the entrance of the passage, and with the other hand he was carrying Saul and Eddie. The communicator he was carrying suddenly rang. "Captain, are you there?" "Sam," Steve whispered back. "Captain, are you in the main driving hall?" "I'm here to rescue you now." Outside the descending helicopter carrier, Falcon Sam was wearing goggles, spreading his steel wings, and swooping down with his head down, trying to find the location of the main driving hall. "No, don't come in," Steve resolutely refused, and seeing that he had descended to a height of 2,000 meters, he firmly said, "You enter the main hall of the aircraft carrier to save me now, and you can't even escape yourself. If we are destined to die here, then you are the one who survived the Earth, one of the heroes." "Captain," Sam gritted his teeth, "if I want to watch you die, I can't do it." "We're not waiting to die," Steve said in a deep voice. "We are waiting for hope." "Hope," Sam repeated inexplicably. "Yes, hope." Steve took a deep breath and looked out of the floor-to-ceiling windows. He was still descending, and he could already see the forest and lake at the end. He said to himself, "The vibration of the fight has stopped, which means he won." Caesar said that he can solve the current difficulties, so what are you waiting for now, at this moment? At an altitude of about 1,000 meters, the unconscious Caesar was still rolling and falling. In the strong wind howling head-on, Caesar raised his eyebrows, and then opened his eyes with difficulty. He looked at the land not far below, then looked up at the aircraft carrier that was still falling, and his consciousness came back instantly. "By the way, I can't stop here, and I have to stop the aircraft carrier from crashing," Caesar muttered weakly, but his body was too tired, and there was no energy in his body that could be extracted and converted. Not to mention trying to save the downed aircraft carrier, he couldn't even maintain normal flight. Too careless, really too careless, actually exhausted the energy and strength of the body. Caesar clenched his fists unwillingly. Is it all over? Caesar had the same question as fury in his heart. Suddenly, a flash of orange light fell in front of Caesar's eyes, making his eyes full of glittering golden light. This is it. Caesar opened his eyes wide in surprise, only to see dawn break in the sky covered by dark clouds, and the bright sun shines down, shining on his naked upper body. Puff. Caesar's originally frail heart beat suddenly and powerfully, and his breathing became more. Even if you can look inside, you will definitely see his body, as if forming a giant energy conversion factory, frantically absorbing the falling solar energy. Power, come back. Caesar's eyes were as bright as stars. He exhaled lightly, loosened his 5 fingers, and clenched them into fists forcefully and firmly. He violently rolled the fish in midair, stopped the inertia of the falling body in an instant, and jumped up using the air as a pedal on the floor, bathed in the sun's rays, and flew towards the helicopter carrier above with constant acceleration. When he came to the bottom of the helicopter carrier, Caesar held his breath and put his little hands on the steel shell. Work hard, work hard. Ka-ka-ka. In just a split second, under the force of 10,000 tons, the steel shell that the palm was touching immediately dented inward. Caesar's entire body was almost stuck inside, but despite this, he still didn't say a word, concentrated all the strength of his body on his arms, and flew and sprinted to push the helicopter carrier up. The helicopter carrier, weighing hundreds of tons, pressing down on Kaiser, still roared down and fell, and slid down hundreds of meters in the blink of an eye. "Stop for me." Seeing that there were still a few hundred meters left to touch the ground, Caesar let out a loud shout. His upper body swelled up slightly, his arms were covered with veins, his body sank into the hollow of the shell, and he pushed up desperately. The power forms a practical shock wave, starting from Caesar, and spreading along the outer shell of the aircraft carrier. Chapter 443 Superman Power, Aircraft Carrier Takes Off. Helicopter aircraft carrier, in the main pilot hall. Everyone, see you in the next life. Eddie stared helplessly at the floor-to-ceiling windows, the ever-enlarged forest land that was about to be touched, and couldn't help but close his eyes tightly in despair. He wasn't the only one. Most of the surviving people on the aircraft carrier didn't get any better. They all instinctively let out howls and screams to vent their fear of death. At the critical moment, the helicopter carrier, which had lost the thrust of 2 engines, suddenly stopped without warning, accompanied by a tremor that spread to the entire cabin, and did not drop even a meter. As if time had stopped, the helicopter carrier hovered in mid-air at about 500 meters, casting a large shadow on the forest lake below, causing bursts of birds to fly to the blue sky in panic. Seeing this scene by chance, the New York civilians in the vicinity could not help but sit softly on the ground, holding their breath, and looked at the dark and cold steel military fortress in the sky in horror. The weightlessness and tremor stopped at the same time. The helicopter carrier kept tilting, and the original calm was restored, and the main driving hall fell into silence. After a few seconds, the aircraft carrier stopped. This is how the same thing. My God, everyone is still alive. The survivors on the aircraft carrier looked around and whispered in surprise. Okay, Director Fury confirmed that the aircraft carrier did not fall again, and at the same time he let out a sigh of relief. He got up and looked in the direction of Agent Hill. Could it be? The restart of the 2 engines has been completed. Not at all. Stopping the operation of the virtual keyboard, Hill also felt incredible, looking at the projection screen in front of him that was still repairing the system. Tread. Steve let go of the handle of the iron door, landed firmly on the floor, and put Saul and Eddie down. He dialed the communicator and asked in a deep voice, Sam, have you seen it? What's going on here, Captain? In fact, I don't know too well. Stretching 3 to 4 meters long steel wings, Sam circled around the side of the helicopter carrier, and then swooped down to the bottom, frowning as he watched the helicopter carrier stop falling inexplicably. On the side of the helicopter carrier tilted down, the 2 vortexes of the engines have not been restarted, and only the 2 engines on the other side are dragging. But at this moment, the bottom of the helicopter carrier seemed to be injected with the power of a third party, so that the severely damaged carrier hovered steadily in the air. Sam flew to the bottom of the helicopter carrier, and soon he seemed to have discovered something. His dark face was frightened, and he showed an unbelievable expression. Oh my God, did you find anything? Sam, Steve asked anxiously when he heard the exclamation from the other end of the communicator. It's Caesar, Sam trilled back. Caesar, did you see Caesar? Where is he now? Steve asked. Sam swallowed hard, and said dryly, he is carrying the helicopter carrier you're on. What are you talking about? Steve suspected that he had heard it wrong, and looked at Natasha, Eddie and others who also looked incredible. Captain. It's Caesar. He is carrying the aircraft carrier with both hands, preventing the helicopter carrier from falling, Sam shouted excitedly. He hung under the aircraft carrier, looking up at the extremely short figure at the bottom of the aircraft carrier. The body of a young child is to a helicopter carrier what an ant is to an elephant. But now, that insignificant ant is carrying an elephant on its shoulders, set it up in the sky. Almost all of Caesar's body sank into the bottom shell, but his hands still held the helicopter carrier forcefully, pushing upwards with unspeakable superhuman strength against a backdrop of the rising sun on the horizon. His blonde hair became extremely bright and dazzling. Sam stared blankly, and the detached scene of turning the tide was deeply etched into his mind, and probably he will never forget it. Get up. Caesar's small face was incomparably serious and dignified, and the blood in his body was boiling like lava, and his whole body was still in the stage of exertion. His hands, arms, left shoulder, and wrapping his little head all resisted the sunken hard shell, quickly dispelling the solar energy into infinite power. Under the irrigation of superhuman strength, the helicopter carrier was lifted up bit by bit. Caesar tried his best to carry the helicopter carrier, sweating, and flew towards the blue sky with difficulty and stability. In the main driving hall, hearing the feedback from Sam and seeing the aircraft carrier go up, Steve took a deep breath and sat on the floor next to the unconscious soul. Steve smiled in relief, and whispered, I knew that guy. He always said what he said. Yeah, no matter what time it is, they will always do something amazing and surprise us. Natasha nodded in agreement. Eddie was confused, looked at Steve, then at Natasha. What are you talking about? Steve and Natasha looked at each other, smiled, and waved their hands in unison. "It's okay," Director Fury said quickly to Hill. "Hill, take advantage of this opportunity. Hurry up." "Of course I know," Hill replied, putting his hands on the virtual keyboard, his 5 fingers bouncing quickly, and a nearly full progress bar was displayed on the projection screen. "The first and second engine systems are being restarted. 3, 2, 1, the system has restarted." This prompt sounded like the sound of nature, and sounded in the main driving hall. Sam raised his head outside and saw the vortex of the first and second engines located at the lower end. The giant windmill began to rotate slowly, and the strong propulsion generated caused the aircraft carrier to rise rapidly on the inclined side, and only then did the helicopter carrier return to the normal sailing. Caesar was still holding his hands on the bottom until the helicopter carrier flew up to 1,000 meters, and then he loosened his hands in relief. "It's over." The strength faded, and the conversion of solar energy in the body also stopped suddenly. Although there is still energy left, the fatigue of the body has already exceeded the limit of endurance, and it is completely dependent on willpower to survive until now. As soon as Caesar closed his eyes, he fell into coma completely. His originally vigorous body suddenly became like a rock, falling straight down from the sky. "Sam, the engine has been repaired. You and Caesar come to the main driving hall and gather." "In the hall," Steve said to the communicator. Sam responded hastily, "Not yet, I'm afraid." "What?" Steve asked in surprise. "He's falling." "Caesar is falling." At the same time as Sam said, he drew his wings inward, and his arms were close to his body, so as to reduce the air resistance and accelerate to dive down, chasing after Caesar, who fell unconsciously and freely close to close. Sam stretched out his hands and hugged Caesar. The steel wings on his back spread out, and with the humming of the mechanical engine, they violently flapped and flew into the sky. Chapter 444 Caesar and number 039, S backhand. After ascending and maintaining an altitude of 5,000 meters, the helicopter carrier finally returned to normal navigation. After the baptism of previous fierce battles, the helicopter carrier has left a messy and tragic trace on both the surface of the shell and the interior of the cabin. The shell and deck of the aircraft carrier were broken in many places, and there were extremely serious gaps. In order to ensure that there would be no more accidents, the staff could only use iron plates in an emergency to seal the holes. It's like adding a few conspicuous rag patches to a new, gorgeous dress. The vortex of the third engine was still emitting wisps of black smoke, making a cracking noise. Inside the helicopter carrier, the staff has begun to clean the passage and the cabin, take away the dead bodies and the wounded, and put the instruments, tables and chairs back to their original state. It's just that many people still have dazed eyes, and their faces are stiff and expressionless. Obviously they haven't reacted from the surprise attack just now. The scene can only be described in 2 words: tragic. It was too tragic. In the main driving hall, under the organization of Chief Fury and Agent Hill, part of the staff reorganized into a driving team to conduct indiscriminate monitoring of the damaged helicopter carrier and count the casualties and property losses caused by the attack. Captain America Steve, Black Widow Natasha, and Hawkeye Button sat side by side on a step in the lobby, looking down at the post-war repair site in a trance. "We lost this game." Steve lowered his chin with both hands, his handsome and young face was dignified, and sighed softly. "We lost completely." "Sure enough, we can't underestimate that Luo from the alien god realm. K is a very difficult guy," Natasha said with emotion. "Captain, the previous wars are better, right? There are no conspiring spies lurking, no talented aliens participating, and no magic hammers flying around. It's hard to say." Steve shook his head and said, "I was too careless this time. I was used to leaning on that person's back and following his figure, but now I can only step forward step by step." Natasha lowered her head and said softly, "Me too. If you always follow that person, you will inevitably relax physically and mentally, and you will never be able to become a hero on your own." Director Fury came from a distance, glanced at the 3 Steves who were still immersed in failure, and said indifferently, "During the previous raid, 26 agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. were killed and countless were injured. In this, among them, Agent Callison did not have time to give first aid and died. He's dead." Director Fury's tone became extremely heavy. Agent Callison, one of the veteran agents who assisted Fury in creating the Avengers. As long as he is a member of the Avengers, it is estimated that no one does not know him. Damn it, Bart blamed himself, and slammed his fist on the floor. Steve was silent, not knowing what to say. "What about young Master Caesar, is he alright?" Natasha asked with concern. Fury nodded and said, Caesar is fine. He is just still in a coma. In the battle just now, he has exceeded his physical limit and can no longer participate in the next battle. It's good that people are fine. Natasha lowered her head in shame. Just now, they didn't help at all. Director Fury looked at the three silent Steves, took a deep breath suddenly, and shouted, you three. But the top agents and super soldiers on the planet, wouldn't you just give up after encountering this setback? Don't forget who you are. All three of Steve trembled. Of course I haven't forgotten. We are Avengers. Steve clenched his fists tightly, and slowly stood up from the steps. At the same time, Natasha and Barton also got up, standing beside the captain on one left and one on the right. That's right, Chief Fury showed relief, and said with a dark and serious face, don't think about backing down. Even if you have to bite the bullet, you have to push me up. Otherwise, how can you be worthy of the sacrifice of those agents just now? Indeed, no one can be sacrificed anymore. Natasha nodded in deep agreement. Bart said coldly, I'll shoot my arrow at that bastard's head. Then now, Director Fury was about to say something when the door of the driving hall suddenly opened. So, who was wearing a red cloak and silver armor, kept rubbing his messy blonde hair with his hands, walked into the main driving hall, scanned the crowd and shouted, hey, has anyone seen my hammer? So, you're awake. Natasha let out a sigh of relief, blinked and said, can't you cast summoning? That's why it's so strange. I can't summon my hammer. With a wave of his hand, Soul hurriedly turned around in the hall. His eyes swept around, and he didn't remember the fact that he was almost killed before. In my heart, I regard Thor's hammer as more important than my own life. I know where your hammer is. Steve stepped forward and patted Saul on the shoulder reassuringly. My shield should be there too. Yes, that would be great. By the way, where's my brother Loki? Saul thanked him first, then looked around and said belatedly. This nerve-wracking reflex arc. Everyone in the hall was speechless for a while. This funny scene just eliminated the atmosphere of depression and mourning accumulated earlier. Steve said in a deep voice, Loki has already escaped, and he must be in the new Stark Industries building in the center of New York now. He wants to use the nuclear reaction energy there to activate cosmic magic and open a new space for his alien army. Portal, it's not too late. We have to go right away. Natasha tidied up the leather clothes a little bit, dusted off her body, and suddenly asked in surprise, wait, where's Eddie? Where did he go? Sam happened to walk into the driving hall to join the crowd, and replied, Eddie. He said that the toxin must be recovered, so he has already taken the first step in the fighter plane. Then let's drive the fighter jet and head to New York City immediately, led by Steve as Captain America, Thor, Black Widow Natasha, Hawkeye Button, and Falcon Sam followed closely behind and left the main driving hall in a mighty manner 5 minutes later. A black fighter plane took off from the helicopter carrier, its wings pierced through the clouds, its engine roared at high speed, and headed for the central city of New York dozens of kilometers away. Director Fury stood by the French windows of the main driving hall, watching the black fighter plane disappear into sight, wondering what he was thinking. Agent Hill suddenly came from behind him, and whispered a word close to his ear. Okay, I get it. Director Fury nodded majestically. He turned and left the driving hall alone, walked through several lengthy passages, and finally came to a hidden cabin. He reached out and pressed the detector next to the door, and confirmed it through fingerprints and pupils, and the door opened with a click. Director Fury stepped in, and saw a table in the middle of the huge room, on which there were enough hot dishes for 10 people. Caesar was sitting on a chair. He was so hungry that his head was almost buried on the table, destroying the highly nutritious food on the plate at a superhuman speed. Director Fury closed the door with his backhand, sat on the chair directly opposite, and said, they have already set off. Everything is as you expected, Caesar. Very well, that's right. Caesar tore a whole piece of beef, chewed it a little, then swallowed it, and said with an innocent smile, the war has just begun. Chapter 445 Earth and number 039, S Home Court, the beginning of an alien war. Caesar was laughing, but Fury couldn't laugh at all. I still don't understand. Fury put his hands on the table, stood up slightly, looked directly at Caesar in the opposite chair, and asked in a deep voice, Caesar, why? I already knew Loki's intentions, but he didn't stop his plan first, but let him follow his own plan. The script is running. Next, what we have to deal with may not only be Loki, but also an alien army capable of conquering the Earth. Caesar smiled and didn't answer. He continued to pick up a roasted chicken leg that was as big as his own arm, opened his mouth, and directly stuffed the chicken leg into his mouth, his cheeks on both sides bulging exaggeratedly. That's right. When Loki invaded the Earth and took away the Rubik's Cube, Caesar knew all his next plans. After all, he was the man who had read the script. If he even forgot the far-reaching New York War in Avengers, it would be too embarrassing for the Traverser. Not only did Caesar know about Loki's plan early on, but he also saw all the poisonous minds being manipulated by the spiritual staff in front of the church door. While Loki was allowed to succeed on the basis of knowing everything, this is something that the later knower, Fury, did not understand. Quickly explain. Director Fury had a stern face, and he suddenly realized that he was also one of the pawns who were calculated. And the mastermind behind the scenes is a child sitting in front of him who looks only 4 or 5 years old. Caesar reluctantly put down half of the chicken leg, chewed the meat in his mouth, and said vaguely, "Didn't I ask you to meet the president a long time ago and apply for an emergency evacuation of people living in the central city of New York? Now New York City is basically a city. The city is empty. What else is there to worry about? The point is not this. We could have directly arrested Loki or killed him before he attacked. There is no need to come to this point today." Fury couldn't help but slam down the table, frowned suddenly, and looked at Caesar, who was with the old god. "So, you have long thought of using the entire New York City as a large-scale battlefield to face the alien army. That's right, you're right. I will reward you with half a drumstick." Caesar smiled, and handed over the oily half of the chicken leg, with a row of teeth marks clearly visible on it. Fury was silent, sat down on the chair, folded his hands on his chest, and thought with his eyes slightly narrowed. "You have seen Loki's plan in advance, but you are only preparing for the war in secret, and you are still following his plan in the open. After you is the upcoming alien war a necessary part of the anti-plan?" "Yes," Caesar admitted directly. "Nonsense," Fury slapped the table, and said in a cold voice with anger, "Once the alien army enters New York, the war will officially begin. Even if New York has been emptied of residents, it will be an indelible loss and disasters. If we fail to control this situation and win in the end, the Earth will probably be destroyed." Caesar's small face was extremely calm, his tone became firm, and he said lightly, "That's why I asked you to notify the military personnel in advance to deploy an elite armed army in New York City, and the Carl family and Stark Industries also did it early. All right, get ready for the fight. He has been waiting for this war for a long time, and this is also the meaning of Kyle, the main body, who created a superhuman clone." The two were silent with their own concerns, so that the cabin fell into an oppressive silence. Fury kept looking at Caesar, put his hand on the table, tapped his fingers, and suddenly said, "Give me a reason why not prevent this war from happening in advance, because it can't be stopped, and there's no need to stop it." Caesar spread his hands and said to Fury, "You should be very clear that there are many other forces outside the Earth, and the original stone of the universe is the supreme treasure that some high-dimensional race forces are crazily snatching. Because the original stone was exposed on the Earth, even if we stop Loki today, more alien forces will descend in the future." Fury said thoughtfully, "So you want to go the other way and take New York as your home ground, and take the initiative to welcome the first battle of the alien invasion? This is undoubtedly an act of a madman. You must know that the worst result may destroy the Earth." Caesar nodded and said, "I have already figured out Loki's strength. He has lost the spiritual scepter, and now he is no threat. If we can't even defeat some of the alien legions led by Loki, then we will be more powerful in the future. How do we deal with the powerful alien forces? If we can win this war, it will be recorded in the annals of history. Not only can we take the opportunity to improve our technological level and narrow the gap between ourselves and the enemy, but we can also sound a wake-up call to the human beings all over the Earth. The future crisis comes from outside the sky." Caesar's eyes were as bright as jewels, full of firmness and decision. "This difficulty is a threshold that New York, and even the Earth, must overcome. Only after the past, there will be a later." Caesar's vision is by no means limited to the present, but a long-term extension to the direction of the next 10 years. "I understand," Fury sighed. "What should come still has to come. This alien war is inevitable after all." At this time Fury remembered that a few years ago, when Kyle just came back from space, he did not hide the aliens, but instead announced it to the world through the media with great fanfare. He couldn't understand it then, but he understands it now. It is inevitable to cause panic, but only by knowing the potential enemy can we better deal with it. And today, Alien enemies really came. After this war, everything, all perceptions and rules will be subverted. The Earth, which has always seemed to be in a dark forest and isolated from other civilization forces, is about to make its first appearance in the universe and fire the first shot. Kyle, we must win this war. And we must win beautifully. Fury stood up, turned and walked towards the door, and said, "Our shield will do our best, no matter the cost." After Fury left, Caesar was the only one left in the closed cabin. "Do your best," Caesar muttered to himself, grabbed the meat on the table with his small hands, and stuffed it into his mouth with big mouthfuls. Energy can be supplemented through various channels, but hunger cannot be eliminated. He took advantage of the present time to give his body a good rest. At this time, New York City. It was noon, and the normally bustling commercial streets could not even see a single pedestrian. Only the screens of some commercial buildings were displaying advertisements, empty like a dead city. Loki didn't care so much. He just sat on the fighter plane and came to the new building of Stark Industries. The scientists and agents he controlled before had used the Rubik's Cube and some material parts to build a teleportation instrument on the top floor balcony at a height of, meters. The transmission equipment is connected to several transportation cables, which are connected to the nuclear reactor inside the building, from which enough high particle energy can be absorbed. "Master Loki, it's finished, and now I'm waiting for you to give orders," the old scientist of the former S.H.I.E.L.D., with dark eyes flickering, reported to Loki humbly and excitedly. "Very good," Rocky smiled charmingly. He stood by the railing of the balcony, looking down at most of the New York City, and waved his hands in a dignified manner. "Then what are you waiting for? Let's start. Open the portal for me." If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelis. There you'll find the original version of this story, and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 446. The Battle of New York begins. In the center of New York City, the new building of Stark Industries. After Loki gave the order, the old scientist came to the instrument table with a smile on his face, and quickly manipulated it with 5 fingers on the virtual keyboard. Following his series of operations on the activation system, the nuclear reactor inside the building under the roof of the top floor, and the energy converter with a height of 10 meters and a radius of 6 meters immediately began to run at high speed with high load. Enough energy to support half of the city, through several cables that have already been installed, travels upstream, and pours into the equipment that stabilizes the Rubik's Cube. The cosmic Rubik's Cube placed in the middle of the instrument, after being injected with strong and sufficient energy, glows with a bright blue light like a stimulus. "It's about to happen." The old scientist showed an obsessed and enthusiastic expression. His cloudy and dark eyes reflected the light of the Rubik's Cube, and he pressed the last start button without hesitation. Laugh. I saw the dazzling blue light, but Loki next to him didn't notice that the boxy cosmic magic burst out a tiny crack on the outside, and then the inner rough stone power overflowed from the top of the teleportation instrument like an antenna. It exploded and gathered into a dark blue beam of energy blasting towards the sky. The moment the beam of energy hit the sky thousands of meters above, the sky shattered and opened a small space gap, and a mysterious and unknown star map could be vaguely seen in the sky of New York City. With a raging space energy, the gap in the sky continued to spread, and in less than 10 seconds, it evolved from a gap with a radius of 1 meter to a hole in space with a radius of 10 meters, and it continued to expand. It can be seen through the wormhole-like space hole, and at the other end is the dimly lit outer universe, in which several giant star warships are suspended. Seeing the opening of the space portal, the alien army, which had been waiting for a long time, suddenly seemed like locusts, either driving a small mechanical shuttle or a large Quinjet fighter, and entered New York City on Earth densely through the space hole. Ho ha, come on, my undefeated army. Occupy this wild planet for me. Loki looked up at the sky, opened his hands, closed his eyes, and laughed wildly against the strong wind. He didn't look like he was fighting, but he seemed to be enjoying it happily. "See, father. One day, you will be proud of me," Loki thought for no reason. In the outer city of New York, at an altitude of about a kilometer, the black fighter with the shield logo slowly lowered its height and emerged from stealth mode. "That's what's going on." Natasha was in the pilot's seat controlling the fighter plane. She frowned. Through the windshield, she could see outside New York City. There were countless military helicopters and armed vehicles maintaining order. On the main roads outside New York City, there are siren police cars on both sides of the road, and the roads are full of slow-moving vehicles and pedestrians. They all head out of the city in unison, densely swarming like ants migrating. I don't know if I'm old-fashioned, but the efficiency of the military and the police is so fast, Steve on the co-pilot said in surprise. Not at all, Sam was also surprised, scratching his head and said, easing out all residents in New York City in advance. This is a big move that shocked the world, and it is absolutely impossible without the approval of the White House and the Congress. Steve was even more surprised. He looked at the silent people on the fighter plane, and said in a deep voice, that is to say, at least half a day ago, the high-level officials have judged that something will happen in New York and have taken emergency measures. Loki was just caught half a day ago. I don't know who it is. Such a bold proposal. If nothing happens in New York, wouldn't he have to bear a mountain of infamy? Sam said with emotion. No need, you see. Barton, who had been taciturn all this time, suddenly pointed his finger forward, and everyone followed his prompt to look, and all gasped in unison. Even in the outer city of New York, it can be clearly seen that a beam of blue light rushes towards the sky, and the sky has already cracked a huge hole from the hole. A large number of unknown alien fighters poured out, circling and dragging, and descended into the city below. Loki, he succeeded. Soul dropped this sentence expressionlessly, holding Thor's hammer, and walked vigorously to the rear tail cabin. The alien forces that the Patriarch once said are really coming. Natasha swallowed a mouthful of saliva, grasped the pilot panel of the fighter plane, and the knuckles of her slender fingers turned white. Barton took out a bow behind his back, his eyes glowed coldly. He suffered a dark loss at the hands of Loki, and now he is full of anger waiting to vent. Everyone, are you ready? Steve stood up from his seat, put on the dark blue helmet, and put the 5-star round shield resting on the ground on his left arm firmly. At your command, Captain. Both Natasha and Barton nodded. Let's go. If Loki wants to start a war, then he will. Steve's face was stern, and his words were crisp and sharp. All oral speeches are not as good as direct actions. The alien army entrusted by Thanos to Loki is a group of elite soldiers from mechanical forces. These mechanical soldiers are iron-blooded, obey orders, and are good at using mechanical fighters and laser weapons to launch aggressive strikes. Just descending from the space wormhole to the central city of New York, most of the mechanical soldiers are driving small shuttles, wandering back and forth in the streets densely, but what they are facing is the empty city that has already evacuated its residents. When they were at a loss about the situation, the windows of many buildings were quietly opened, and the muzzles of the bazookas placed in the rooms were aimed at the alien shuttles wandering outside the streets at this time. In a building in the center of New York City, Colonel Rhodes, who is in charge of this military operation, has already put on the war machine Tony made for him, unpainted steel armor improved from Mark III. I also appropriately added powerful back shells. Colonel Rhodes aimed his hand cannon at the alien shuttle that was swimming back and forth outside the window, and ordered to the walkie-talkie, 3, 2, 1, fire, bang bang bang. Almost at the same moment, the streets of central New York were filled with bombardments, and the targets were those alien shuttles that had just landed on Earth. The first batch of patrolling mechanical soldiers were caught off guard by the human army lurking in the empty city. Many flying shuttles were immediately bombarded in the mid-air of the street, and waves and debris rained down below. This scene is as spectacular as fireworks. Come on, deport them. After the bombardment resounded, a group of well-equipped American soldiers rushed out of many buildings. They held rifles, firearms and bazookas, and launched indiscriminate shooting against the shuttles and aliens descending on the street. Boom boom boom. In some underground garages, with the sound of the earthquake, armed tanks drove out domineeringly, and the muzzles blasted into the sky unstoppably. The silver war machine broke out of the window, and the engine roared and propelled, allowing him to shuttle nimbly between the streets, and the hand cannons of his left and right hands severely shot down the shuttle. The human army has been lurking in the city for a long time. Loki, who was standing on the top floor of the Stark Tower, looked down at this reversed scene, but the corners of his mouth curled up quietly, and he smiled evilly. Just right, I was afraid that you would hide and spend time looking for you. Give it to me. Loki waved his big hand, and from the wormhole in the sky, mechanical shuttles and Kun-style fighters swept down. New York battle officially started. Chapter 447 The beginning of the war. Goodbye Ancient One. New York City Center. At this time, The energy light beam that goes straight to the sky is the center, regardless of the sky and the land. The alien mechanical army headed by the evil god Loki, and the elite army headed by the American Colonel Rhodes, the two forces officially collided head to head. In just a few seconds, the entire city of New York was reduced to an iron-blooded battlefield. Lasers and artillery shells were intertwined back and forth, and gunpowder smoke and artillery fire lingered in every corner. The alien mechanical legion thundered down from the wormhole of the sky-changing scene. The U.S. elite troops stepped forward to fight from the ground streets of New York without showing any weakness. This extremely spectacular and tragic scene seemed to be a desperate contest between heaven and earth. My God, run, aliens are really coming. Pedestrians who were still jammed on the edge of New York's outer city, seeing the raging sky and thunderous earth behind them in the city center, couldn't help speeding up and fleeing out of the city in panic. They were about to converge into a crowd that even the police could not control, a torrent of crowds to maintain order. At this moment, a black fighter plane marked with a shield logo, from hundreds of meters in the air, flew against the direction of the crowd's evacuation, and flew alone and firmly towards the city center where the war had already begun. Look at it, I don't know who shouted in the crowd, and then countless people looked up and looked forward, and they could see countless like black spots appearing in the sky outside the city. The black spots kept enlarging, and when they got close, they could see clearly that they were helicopters and fighter planes, flying towards the changing battle situation without hesitation. This just confirms what Director Fury said to Caesar earlier: I will do my best, at all costs, inside the city center. Colonel Rhodes led the ambush elite army, which caught the alien legion by surprise. But when the alien legion reacted and concentrated their firepower to fight, the gap between the two sides' technological weapons was vividly reflected. The standard weapons of the alien mechanical legion are all laser beam energy, and the power can easily penetrate the armored tanks known as the Land Overlord on the Earth. Coupled with the fact that the mechanical aggressors are not dead, the number is astonishing, and the rampant attack of locusts has severely suppressed the elite army of the U.S. imperialists at an absolute disadvantage. Come again, alien bastard. Colonel Rhodes, the leader of the field team, also known as the War Machine, started the engine and was suspended in the midair of the street. He was besieged by several small flying shuttles, and he could only rely on non-stop flying to avoid the laser beam bombardment hand cannon. But there were too many alien invaders. They surrounded him densely, and gradually narrowed the encirclement during the fierce exchange of fire. The pressure from the enemy made Rhodes almost out of breath. Wearing the armor of the War Machine, he glanced around, looked at the surrounding alien shuttles, suddenly activated a device on his wrists, and then his whole body suddenly spun. Hands, give you a taste of this. Small shuttles and alien invaders flocked towards the War Machine, and at the moment when he was almost submerged, two red-hot lasers burst out from it. And as the laser beam circled left and right, the aliens within 10 meters of the surrounding area invaded. Those, together with the small flying shuttles, were all cut into several pieces and scattered to the ground. Even Rhodes himself didn't expect that the one-time emergency weapon that Tony configured for him a few years ago would be so powerful. He was suspended in the air in a daze, looking at the enemies around him who had been wiped out, and then at his wrist, the laser device that had ushered in scrapping, couldn't help blurting out, "Tony, I love you." Soon, Rhodes couldn't be happier. A cloud-like shadow enveloped him, and War Machine looked up. His pupils contracted suddenly in surprise. A large Kun-style alien warship is approaching here. The alien warship is the size of a normal aircraft carrier, and its shape is similar to a centipede. In the sun, against a faint steel luminescence, it swims in the sky, like a hill towards a War Machine. Pressing down, the countless muzzles adjusted their angles to aim. I rely on. The disparity in arming was too great. War Machine didn't even think about fighting back, so it turned around and sped away. The Kun-style alien warship was chasing after it, rampaging on the street, and the skyscraper was likely hit by it, and then collapsed. The War Machine is in the front, and the Quinn-type battleship is behind, and the distance between the two is constantly shrinking. At this critical moment, a missile dragged its tail flame, came from the side, and directly landed on the head of the Kun-type battleship, bursting out billowing smoke and air waves. This is, War Machine suddenly stopped in the air, looking in the direction of the missile, and saw a black fighter plane slowly landing. When it was still 10 meters above the ground, the rear cabin of the fighter plane had already been opened, and the lightly three figures jumped down. "How's the situation now?" asked the tall and muscular blonde young man, holding a round shield and wearing a 5-star uniform on his chest. "It's not too late, is it?" The black man stretched out a pair of steel wings, also propelled by the engine, and held 2 pistols floating in the air, said lightly. The third black-haired young man didn't speak, but indifferently took out an arrow and put it on the bowstring of the bow held in his left hand. Seeing the familiar people, War Machine almost burst into tears. "Captain, you guys are here, since the war has begun, let's go," Steve shouted, his eyes full of determination. "Yes," everyone responded in unison. At this moment, someone is still on his way to the battlefield. The Great War in New York. It's really spectacular. Seeing it in the movie is far better than experiencing it in person. On the border of central New York, Caesar was flying at a low speed in the air. Superman could clearly see the extremely fierce urban battlefield more than 10 kilometers away, and he could also see the flashing thunder. Obviously, even Thor had officially joined the battle. Catch the thief first and capture the king first. Do you want to go find Loki now and beat him up? Caesar rubbed his chin, and while he was thinking, he suddenly felt a fluctuation of some kind of strange energy from the street not far away. This feeling is, Caesar opened his eyes wide in surprise. Rooftop of House A177, Brick Street. There's a frog-like cover-up, and a layer of magic shield, which blocks the alien mechanical soldiers who want to invade it. A bald woman in a yellow robe with a calm face stood on the roof of the building with her hands behind her back. There was a circle of magic seals on the wrist of her left hand. As she kept waving her left hand, the shells that bombarded the protective shield of the house bounced off ahead of time. Tread. Light footsteps sounded behind her, and the bald-headed woman turned her head, and saw a blonde child about 5 years old smiling at her. "Long time no see, Master Ancient One." Guyu was not surprised at all. With a trace of helplessness in his eyes, he said softly, "Yeah, long time no see, General Kyle." Chapter 448 Variables from the Future. General Kyle. I haven't heard this name for a long time. It has been 7 or 80 years since the end of World War II, Caesar sighed, ignoring gravity, levitating from the ground, staring at Guyu with sapphire-like eyes, and asked in surprise, "How did you recognize me so quickly?" Guyu clasped his hands behind his back without hiding them, and explained directly and clearly, "From the beginning of birth, all creatures have their own unique souls, and we, who protect the lineage of mages, have a pair of eyes that can see souls clearly." "So it is." Caesar nodded in approval. This superhuman clone of himself was created through soul splitting. He naturally believed in the mysterious and unpredictable theory of the soul. But believe it, if you want to touch the realm of the soul, it is the gap between heaven and earth. I don't know what level of ability card this old woman has after practicing spells for hundreds of years. I really want to take a good look at it. Caesar looked at Sharon standing in front of the ancient mage, who was less than 3 meters away, and felt itchy in his heart to borrow the card drawing system from the main body. The idea of drawing the ability card from Master Guyu has lasted for decades. It's a pity, when the main body was there, Master Guyu couldn't be found anywhere. The main body was not there, but the avatar bumped into it by mistake. Thinking of this, Caesar drooped his ears like a child who had lost candy. The ancient mage didn't think that Caesar was still thinking about her. He turned his back to Caesar, stood by the railing with his hands behind his back, and calmly looked at the extremely chaotic and tragic New York battlefield outside the protective net of the house. Master Guyu said in a calm tone, "General Kyle, I knew from the first time I saw you in New York decades ago that you are a unique evil star in this world. People who can influence and subvert the world, even the dimension of the universe. Your words are a bit too much. How can anyone say that others are evil stars?" Caesar spread his hands helplessly, floated forward, and leaned side by side with the Ancient One mage, and also looked out at the chaotic battlefield. "Other alien forces are bullying you. To put it crudely, they are riding on your head and pulling shit. We can't wait for them to slaughter our loved ones, ravage our world, and then find ways to get revenge." Master Guyu retorted, "You are right, but it is not a perfect solution. War can never solve fundamental problems." Caesar smiled and responded firmly, "The surefire strategy is to always remain in awe of the weak, and to have a powerful strength over others." Master Guyu remained silent, "And the weak prey on the strong, and the strong are kings. This is the eternal truth of the universe." Naturally, she couldn't refute it, but she couldn't fully accept it in her heart. The strength that surpasses others is easy to say, but one does not know that there is a sky beyond the sky, and there are people beyond people. Even Guyu, Who is the guardian of the Earth? Dare not say that he has enough power to protect the Earth from foreign invasion. But she has things that other people can't do, but it doesn't mean the man in front of her can't do it. If it's him, maybe he can really do it, something that even I can't do, the ancient mage thought to himself, looked sideways at Caesar, nodded his head imperceptibly, and smiled slightly at the corner of his mouth. Then wait and see. Caesar grinned and said, Master Ancient One, you are not young anymore. If you can't make a move, then retire as soon as possible, sit in the auditorium, and watch my performance carefully. I will kill the villains who dare to come to Earth. Power, all of them will be beaten to pieces. For a lady, saying that she is too old, isn't this sentence too much? Master Guye smiled lightly, and she, who is always serious in speech, actually had a hint of ridicule at this time. Decades have passed in a blink of an eye. As the guardian of the Earth, Ancient One finally recognized Caesar, that is, Kyle. Even if Kyle is the biggest variable, it is believed to be the variable that reverses everything for the better. Okay, I already know the location of the Mage Temple in New York. Next time I'm free, I'll come in and play. Caesar eagerly rubbed his palms, looking at the battle in New York outside. His Kryptonian blood, eager to fight, was gradually boiling hot, and he couldn't hold back the urge to join the battle. Okay, you are welcome to the temple as a guest, Master Guye said lightly, without holding back. Caesar waved goodbye and was about to fly out of the ancient house when he suddenly turned around and asked the ancient mage, Are you really going to make a move this time? Mage Ancient One shook her head lightly. With a time gem in her hand, she had already seen the various endings of this battle in New York. There are 65 endings in total, and as long as there is Caesar, it is a complete victory. What does this mean? Representing Caesar alone, he has the terrifying combat power to expel Loki and his alien legion out of the country. He alone is enough to end this war, so all other failure factors are directly ruled out. Then I'll go first. Caesar bickered and flew out of the house, but at this moment, a huge dark green figure suddenly passed over his head at high speed, and fell from the outside street to the roof of the New York temple where the spell was hidden. Okay, the flying Caesar paused in midair. Together with Ancient One, they all looked behind, and saw a 2-meter-tall green muscular monster coming to the door on the top of the building, peeping furtively inside. Hulk, seeing the familiar visitor, Caesar opened his eyes wide in surprise. Half an hour ago, he was beaten and flew out of the aircraft carrier with the toxin, and he recovered so quickly and safely? Hearing the sudden immature cry, the Hulk was taken aback. When it turned back to see Caesar, its huge and domineering body suddenly trembled. Caesar was even more surprised, looked the Hulk up and down, and said in amazement, Is it Dr. Banner? You controlled the Hulk's state? Could it be that after being beaten up by me, you completely enlightened? Tap tap tap. Without saying a word, the Hulk took a few steps forward, clapped his giant hands forward, and hugged Caesar in his arms, rubbing Caesar's soft face with his stiff and rough chin. What are you doing? Resisting against the opponent's chin, Caesar became more and more confused. He was undoubtedly the Hulk at the moment, but he was completely different from the Hulk who had become angry and mad at any time before. The ancient mage next to him seemed to see through everything, and said softly, Caesar, he is not the person you know. She paused, and continued, to be more precise. He comes from a certain time and space in the future. After all, it still appeared, a variable from the future. Chapter 449 A Disparate Future. New York Battlefield, Stark Industries' new building. The cosmic Rubik's Cube is in the portal instrument. With the irrigation of nuclear reaction energy, the cracks on the outer shell of the Rubik's Cube continue to extend, and the remaining power of the original space stone continues to inject into the sky. When the space wormhole in the sky spreads to the maximum, a space vortex has faintly formed, and the sky seems to be completely torn apart. The huge gap in the space vortex is enough to allow alien warships the size of an aircraft carrier to pass through easily. When such a group of warships of top technological civilization are unreasonably thrown into the battlefield below, the armed tanks, military helicopters, and fighter jets that the human army relies on, all ushered in a devastating blow. In a chaotic street, Steve, covered in blood and gunpowder smoke, swung his shield fiercely again, smashing the steel head of a mechanical soldier into the ground. He kept panting heavily, looked up at the sky, the Kun-style warships that were ramming and bombing the neighborhood without any scruples, and the alien armed forces that filed out from the space vortex couldn't help but move towards the side. Natasha not far away shouted, Natasha, we need to find a way to close the portal. Otherwise these guys can't be killed. I see. Natasha tossed her bright red hair, looked at the source of the teleportation gate on the top floor of the Stark Industrial Building, and looked at the small flying shuttle that kept passing overhead, taking a deep breath. Help me. Are you sure you want to do this? Steve glanced at the shuttle that was constantly coming and going, quickly understood her thoughts, and switched hands to carry the 5-star round shield. I'm sure. It must be very exciting. Natasha licked her dry lips, and suddenly accelerated towards Steve, while Steve sank down, using the buckler as a pedal in cooperation. The moment Natasha stepped on the face of the round shield, Steve pushed it up, and Natasha jumped 10 meters high, just in time to catch a flying shuttle flying overhead, and together disappeared at the end of the street corner. Steve breathed lightly, and said to the communicator, "Someone must block the space portal, so as not to allow the follow-up forces of the Alien Legion to continue to descend on the New York battlefield unimpeded." I go, accompanied by a rough and domineering response. In the sky, Thorkin, the god of thunder in silver armor and red cape, frantically swung Thor's hammer around. Quickly he rose from the sky, his whole body trembling with sizzling lightning, and he rushed towards the space vortex bravely. As if obeying Soul's call, the sky was covered with dark clouds and thunder bursts. Drink. Soul clings to the lightning rod of the modern iron tower, holds Thor's hammer high in his hand, strikes electricity into the sky, and pulls the thunder and lightning in the thundercloud to reverse the space vortex. The scene at this moment was like the wrath of the heavens. Thunder and lightning twisted like snakes to form a grid, and the small flying shuttles that would continue to emerge from the vortex, including the Kun-style battleship, were smashed into the sky on the spot. This is the Thor hammer I am familiar with, Soul sighed, looking at the Thor hammer that was refilled with the power of thunder. For some reason, the energy in the core of the Thor hammer was exhausted, and it was almost difficult to maintain its power as a divine weapon can. Very good. Seeing that Soul blocked the portal, Steve didn't relax his vigilance, and glanced at the Quinn-type warships and small shuttles that had descended on the street. We still need to clear away some of the alien legions that have descended on New York. Colonel Rhodes, the military, are there any follow-up reinforcements on Fang's side? The communication channel received Steve's inquiry, and while the war machine fired at the alien soldiers, it gritted its teeth and said, "Yes, but it will take some time to deploy." Is it? Steve raised his eyebrows, and at this moment, the sound of a motorcycle suddenly came from the road behind him, and the sound came from far to near. Steve looked back, and saw a dilapidated motorcycle slowly approaching from the smoky alley. The driver of the motorcycle was Eddie, who had left alone earlier. Dr. Banner was still sitting on the back seat of the motorcycle and waved to him. "We're not late, are we?" "Just in time." "Without you two monsters, those things are really difficult to solve." Steve couldn't help laughing, and raised his thumb, gesturing to the Quinn-style battleship that was dragging in the air. "What do you say? I'm a hero, not a monster." Eddie bickered, patted his chest, and said confidently and firmly, "Leave it to us." "Right, poison." The voice just fell. Black lines of liquid appeared on the surface of Eddie's body, which swelled and entangled, and quickly combined into a dark cuticle. Flame-like white marks bloomed ragingly from his solid chest. His wide and narrow eyes watched the flying battleships, and grinned open. The bloody mouth with ferocious fangs. "Don't upstage him, he'll be mad." Dr. Banner shrugged his shoulders and took a step forward. The muscles in his body began to swell and turn green. His jacket and shoes burst at a speed visible to the naked eye, leaving only a pair of tough and large pants on the waist of the bucket. Toxin grinned grinningly at the battleships, while the Hulk roared like a thundering beast. "Now you are really finished." Steve stepped aside and cast a sympathetic look at the alien warships. Toxin and Hulk, but they were beaten up by Caesar not long ago, and now they are probably depressed and want to find someone to vent. Just in time, the alien legion hit the muzzle. On the other side, on Brick Street in New York, on the roof of the temple covered by magic. "He's from the future." What Guyi said not only surprised Caesar, but also shocked the future Hulk. In the future, the Hulk quickly released Caesar, looked at the Ancient One solemnly, and asked in surprise, "Who are you?" "We have never met in the future." Master Guyi smiled and said calmly, "I am the owner of this house. As an uninvited guest, you asked who I am without introducing yourself first. I'm here to find Doctor Strange." The future Hulk avoided introducing himself, scratching his head in embarrassment. Caesar frowned. It stands to reason that Doctor Strange hasn't appeared in the current time period. There is also the Hulk in front of him, who not only perfectly controls his emotions, but is also dominated by Dr. Banner's consciousness. and has a gentle temperament that is far from his rough appearance. Could it be that he really came from the distant future? Master Guyu pointed to the street not far away, and said calmly, "Sorry, you came here 5 years too early. Strange. Now works as a surgeon in a hospital 4 or 5 streets away. What is your intention for coming here?" Master Guyu continued to ask. The future Hulk didn't hesitate, and pointed directly at the pendant that Guyu was wearing. The Ancient One mage lowered his head and looked meaningfully at the magic weapon glowing with a green light on his chest. It was the Eye of Agamotto that the mage had guarded for generations, which was also the supreme magic weapon that contained the time gem. And that one, the future Hulk turned sideways and pointed to Caesar himself. "Me?" Caesar pointed to his nose in surprise. Future Hulk quickly shook his head, stared and said, "No, of course not, it's something in your stomach." "My stomach." Caesar rubbed his stomach, and quickly realized that what the future Hulk was referring to should be the mind gem that he had swallowed earlier. For some reason, the new book 500 Years of Marvel has been renamed to come from the future of Marvel, and it already has a certain number of words. New and old book lovers are welcome to join in. Chapter 450. There is no descendant of Caesar. The Hulk from the future 5 years later came to the present time and space in order to obtain the Time Stone and the Mind Stone? This is undoubtedly a fantasy. If he hadn't witnessed it with his own eyes, Caesar really wouldn't dare to think about things that travel through time and space. Caesar was still thinking about it, but the ancient master had already refused. "Sorry, I can't give you the gem." The Hulk in the future was not surprised when he heard the words. He squeezed his fists together, and with the rough and wild oppressive atmosphere, he approached the Ancient One step by step, grinning and said, "I was in a hurry, I didn't intend to ask you want." "Caesar, don't interfere." The future Hulk didn't forget to say something to Caesar beside him. "Don't worry, I won't interfere, and there's no need for it." Caesar folded his arms and floated in mid-air to watch silently, bickering, "But I want to remind you, it's best not to do that. 5 years from now, you will not be able to control the strength of your power." "Still don't know anything." "What?" The Hulk in the future showed a surprised look, walked up to the Ancient One mage, and was about to take the Eye of Agamotto. The Ancient One mage shook his head lightly, and moved suddenly. The 5 fingers of his left hand joined together to form a palm, quickly and powerfully, and slapped on the rock-solid dark green chest of the Hulk. Although this palm is only the strength of an ordinary person, it contains boundless magic power. The future Hulk trembles unexpectedly, and the void soul in Banner's human form flies out of the burly and tall Hulk body. The Ancient One stretched out another finger, flicked forward, and the body of the Hulk who fell back was suspended and flew up, and was placed on a sofa in the corner of the roof. What the hell is going on here? Banner's soul floated in the air, appearing transparent under the sunlight without leaving any shadow. "I just told you not to do anything with her." Caesar sighed lightly. The general structure of the soul is similar to a special energy wave. He who takes natural energy as his nourishment can still see Banner's soul at the moment. The Earth Mage lineage, proficient in soul spells, is so unsolvable. Even if you have a strong body that resists missiles and shreds tanks, mages can directly ignore the body's defenses and severely damage the inner soul of the source of biological life. What's more, standing in front of them at this time is the supreme mage who holds the time gem, has specialized in magic for hundreds of years, absorbed part of the energy of the dark dimension, and is in full strength. Even if you look through the entire galaxy universe, the characters who can wrestle with her can be counted on one hand. "Now can you tell us in detail?" Ancient One mage looked at Banner's soul and said indifferently. "This." Banner's soul floated in the air, looked at Guyi, then at Caesar, and finally nodded helplessly. "Okay. But I can't reveal too much, so as not to affect your current time and space, so I can only give a rough idea. 5 years later, we encountered a powerful force from beyond the sky. In that devastating war, our Earth was completely lost, a crushing defeat. Banner has hidden many messages. But after only listening to a few words, Caesar's eyes showed a bit of understanding, and he said, "Is the enemy you are talking about Thanos?" Banner's soul was taken aback, and blurted out, "How do you know that name?" As soon as he finished speaking, Banner suddenly realized something, and hurriedly covered his mouth with his hands. "Is it really it? This is strange." Caesar frowned. Don't forget that in his previous life, he had just watched the Avengers 3 Crossings. But the difference between the real world and the original movie is that there is his main body, Kyle, and the existence of Superman clone, and he has collected 3 infinite gems beforehand. Under such a premise, The future Earth will also be defeated by Thanos. Banner didn't expect Caesar to think so much, and continued, for some reason, our 6 future Infinity Stones are gone. If we want to reverse everything that has happened and save the people who have been sacrificed, we will only by traveling through time and space, going to several different time and space in batches, and recollecting 6 infinite rough stones. Caesar was silent. I see. Ancient One Mage nodded thoughtfully, then quickly shook his head. But I still can't give you the time stone. Why? Banner asked. The Ancient One Mage didn't answer, and with a wave of his hand, the magic power was formed into a golden streamer. Then he turned his wrist again, simulating 6 infinite gemstones of different colors, gathered and suspended in one of the golden streamer's rings. Guyi said indifferently, Infinity gems have created our current view of time and space flow, not to mention 2 disappearing in the long river of time at the same time. Even if one leaves, it will be an extremely cruel blow to our time and space. She's right, Caesar echoed. Banner thought for a while, and quickly responded, no. We didn't take it away, we just borrowed it. As long as we use up these gems and return them in the current time and space, these gems are equivalent to never leaving, and everything will be fine. Master Guyi still shook his head, and said, you are all limited to theory, and there is one most important problem. Only when you succeed, can you return the gem smoothly. This, Banner was speechless, and said to himself, but why, Doctor Strange, would you give the time stone to Thanos? What did you say? Master Guyi was stunned suddenly. He handed it over on his own initiative. Yes. Maybe he's wrong. Banner nodded. Master Guyi was silent for a moment, then whispered, maybe I was wrong. She waved lightly, and the Hulk body on the chair floated up, rushing towards Banner's soul, and the combination of soul and body was restored as before. The future Hulk touched his chest, looked up, and saw that Guyi was posing with a spell with both hands, wearing the Eye of Agamotto, and as the green light slowly lit up, the pendant revealed the inner well-preserved green gems, that is, the rough stones of time. You are this. Seeing this scene, the Hulk in the future was a little stunned. I don't know why Guyi changed his mind so quickly. The ancient spell said firmly. Strange should be the best among us. In the future, his attainment of time spells is destined to far exceed mine, so there must be a reason for him to do that. In the future, the Hulk solemnly took over the time gem, and then looked at Caesar, who had been floating to the side. What about your decision? Caesar, the soul gem can be given to you. Caesar took a deep breath, looked directly at the future Hulk, and said, but I want to know one thing. The future Hulk said, you ask, if I can tell you. I will definitely answer you. Caesar narrowed his eyes, and asked immaturely but forcefully, in your future, 5 years from now, am I not on Earth? The future Hulk was silent, his lips moved, with a hesitant expression. You? Okay, you don't need to answer. Caesar interrupted its words with a slightly stern face. The future self is obviously not there, because if there is him, the future time and space will never be in such a disparate situation. Then where did he go? And what about the main body Kyle? End of this chapter. Thank you very much for reaching the end. Don't forget to like. Looking for more exclusive content and immediate access? Subscribe to our Patreon. Remember, every like, subscription, or donation encourages us to continue. Thanks to everyone. See you in the next video.